Good morning, everyone. The summit is about to begin. Kindly take your seats. Le sommet va bientôt commencer. Veuillez prendre vos places. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the final day of the Progress Summit. How are we feeling? Energized?
Woo!
Ready for a whole new day, a half day of excellent programming?
Yes. All right, who learned something new today or yesterday? Qui a appris quelque chose de nouveau hier? raise your hand as you're able to. All right, excellent. Lots of raised hands in here. Who's had an idea challenged or changed? A few more, excellent.
We have another amazing lineup of speakers and sessions planned for today. I'm especially excited to be moderating a conversation this afternoon with co-chair of the New York City DSA, Grace Mauser, and Toronto Mayor Olivia Chow's Chief of Staff, Carla Weber-Gallagher, so you should check that out. One of the joys of the summit is seeing how many different parts of the country and the world we can tap into in just a couple of days. So far, in addition to hearing from friends all across Canada, we've heard from progressives working on the ground in New York, in Mexico City, in Minnesota, in Germany, in Ecuador, and the list goes on. This would not have been possible without the generous support of the Progress Summit's equity sponsors, SEIU, NUPG, Crestview Strategy, and the Canadian Teachers Federation. So thank you.
Woo! And since we're on the topic of giving thanks, we also want to give another huge shout out to the Progress Summit's title sponsors, the CLC and Action Network. All right, excellent. So we're going to hear actually this morning from the CLC's very own DT Cochran on the main stage today. And if you have not already, drop by the red cube on the mezzanine level. Action Network is going to be running 15-minute training sessions throughout this AM. So it's definitely going to be a very busy morning. Make sure you check your schedule on the Whova app and don't miss this opportunity to learn more about this fantastic organizing and communication tool.
I need to ask another question before we get started because I've talked to a bunch of people this last afternoon, and I've heard this from many of them. If you missed a session yesterday, are you going back to watch the live stream? Did you know you could do that until right now? While the ballroom was streamed live throughout the day, we also recorded sessions happening upstairs in the Grand Salon. So if you missed anything there, be sure to subscribe to the Broadbent Institute on YouTube. Smash that subscribe button to catch those when they're out.
Et aussi, ce matin, ce sera beaucoup plus rempli que hier, avec des discussions ici et sur le niveau conférence tout au long du matin. So, take a few moments to review the agenda and pick your path. And we'll be back with the award presentation shortly. Thanks, everyone.
I did say I'd be back shortly. To introduce this year's winner of the Jack Layton Progress Prize, please join me in welcoming my friend and fellow board member, Steph Nikitsis.
Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to announce this year's recipient of the Jack Layton Progress Prize. During his long career in public service, Jack loved a good campaign, and you all know that he was at the center of many. Whether it was working with local environmentalists to build a windmill on the shore of Lake Ontario, co-founding the White Ribbon Campaign for Gender Justice, running in multiple campaigns at the municipal and, of course, the federal level, Jack loved nothing more than empowering people to rally around a common cause. So in his honor, and in partnership with Olivia Chow, the Jack Layton Progress Prize is awarded annually to an individual or an organization that's run a particularly noteworthy political or issue-based campaign that reflects the ideals exemplified by Jack, including justice, sustainability, and democracy. This year's Jack Layton Progress Prize is awarded to Amira El-Gawabi. Amira's career is a testament to the inclusive leadership that bridges divides both within Muslim communities and across broader Canadian society. Her work consistently addresses intersectionality, recognizing that race, gender, faith, and class shape different lived realities. Through her work in organizations like the Canadian Anti-Hate Network and the Canadian Commission on Democratic Expression, she's engaged diverse stakeholders, fostering unity in the face of division. As Canada's Special Representative on combating Islamophobia, her educational materials and her media work emphasized mutual understanding and collective action across communities. Please join me in congratulating Amira El-Gawabi, this year's recipient of the Jack Layton Progress Prize.
Thank you so much. Brandy Morin was right. This is a beautiful room, good-looking room, and I'm glad I got my hair done today. Receiving this prize is a profound honor for me. Like so many here, I looked up to Jack Layton, someone whose message of hope, solidarity, and collective courage shaped my understanding of what leadership can and should be. To be recognized in his name, a name that galvanized this country and reminded us what becomes possible when people unite for positive change, is deeply meaningful. It is even more so when I also consider the incredible nominees and the important impacts that they are also making in our country. And as I look around this room, I see so many familiar faces, people who I consider family, people who I've worked with alongside in the labor movement, including at the Canadian Labour Congress, or who worked or collaborated with me during my time as a founding board member at the Canadian Anti-Hate Network or at the National Council of Canadian Muslims, and many more who I've crossed paths with, who showed unwavering allyship and solidarity during my tenure as Canada's Special Representative on combating Islamophobia. The power in a room like this is real. It is the power to love courageously, to act boldly, and to keep pushing forward for a vision of Canada where everyone belongs. A Canada where human rights, dignity, and justice are not aspirational, but lived realities. And being here fills my cup, and I hope it has filled yours too. But we also know the reality outside these walls. There are forces working tirelessly to undermine our collective safety, well-being, and equality. In Quebec, for instance, workers, including educators and even parent volunteers, are barred from participating in public life simply because they wear religious clothing. These are laws the justice system itself has described as cruel, laws that disproportionately harm Quebec Muslim women and which entrench gendered inequality. The Supreme Court of Canada will be hearing the challenge to the use of the notwithstanding clause later this month, and all of us should be paying close attention as it will signal whether or not we have true human rights protections in this country with deep implications in our society. After all, our Charter of Rights and Freedoms is a promise. It is a promise of equality, that every single person in this country can exercise their rights and freedoms without discrimination, without being treated as second-class citizens. That governments cannot undermine these rights in pursuit of electoral wins. We have seen how dehumanization, othering, and dangerous rhetoric has led to tragic and deadly consequences for Canadian Muslims, our fellow Canadians in this country. Notre Charte des droits et libertés est une promesse d'égalité, selon laquelle chaque personne dans ce pays mérite d'exercer ses droits et libertés sans discrimination. Rights of freedom of expression and assembly have also been under attack. Across the country, we see ongoing attempts to silence voices calling for justice in Palestine and to curtail civil liberties when people demand that Canada stand firmly and unequivocally for international law. And on so many other urgent issues, affordability, housing, migrant rights, workers' rights, corporate accountability, the struggle to advance just policies that promote fairness in our society remains constant, demanding, and unrelenting. Yet it is precisely our collective power, our collective care, and our collective commitment to one another that allow us to keep making meaningful gains. When we unite across differences and find common ground, we move this country forward, as Jack taught us, each of us contributing in our own way. And what remains absolutely clear, we need one another. To those who have stood by me and by countless others who've had to confront Islamophobia, a form of hate that remains socially acceptable in some quarters and which is turbocharged in times of war, thank you. Recent headlines may have focused on how I refused to be silenced by the many threats I faced during my role, but the real story is this. It was the love, it was the solidarity, it was the commitment to justice shown by so many Canadians, many of whom are right here in this room, that gave me the strength to keep going. And for those of you who are working in human rights or can bring forward initiatives to advance equity and inclusion in your workplaces or communities, I hope you will seek out the groundbreaking resources our office published and which still remain available, including the Canadian Guide on Understanding and Combating Islamophobia for a More Inclusive Canada, the first of its kind to be published by any government in the world and which was endorsed by the CLC. Thank you, B. And thank you to Jen Hassam for your steady leadership alongside your board and colleagues at the Broadbent Institute. Thank you to my friends like Mohammed Hashim, CEO of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. I call him my second best friend, whose team also lifts me up. And I'd like to take a moment to remember the late Joel Duff, whose legacy of kindness and care continues to shine brightly in my heart, and I know in the hearts of many of those who knew him, as we continue to mourn his sudden passing. Thank you to everyone here and those watching at home, including my dad and my family. I'm heartened and hopeful that together we will shape the country that we all deserve. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here this morning to announce this year's recipient of the Charles Taylor Prize for Excellence in Policy Research. Charles Taylor is one of the great Canadian thinkers of the 20th and the 21st centuries, and as a philosopher and a committed social democrat, much of his work has been grounded in our communities and in the dignity of working people. In recognition of Taylor's rich intellectual legacy, this award is presented annually to a researcher whose work has made a meaningful contribution to advancing a more socially just Canada. I'm proud to announce that this year's recipient is Andrew Jackson. Over Andrew's decades-long career, he has made enormous contributions across a range of economic, social, and political topics, both as the chief economist and director of social and economic policy at the Canadian Labour Congress and for the New Democratic Party of Canada. He was also instrumental in helping to found this very institute, and he remained a close friend to Ed, especially in his latter years. With wit and erudition, Andrew has written widely over the years criticizing trickle-down economics and neoliberal policymaking. He's published research articles, book chapters, a regular column in the Globe and Mail, and a monograph making the case for social democracy with a particular emphasis on labor market institutions, social assistance and protection systems, and the need for full employment at the macroeconomic level. After retiring from the CLC, Andrew taught in the political science department at York University as a visiting Packard professor in social justice, and he remains an active research fellow at the Broadbent Institute to this very day. Please join me in congratulating Andrew Jackson with the Charles Taylor Prize for Excellence in Policy Research, and please welcome Toby Sanger to the stage to accept the award on Andrew's behalf.
Good morning. Very unfortunately, Andrew cannot be with us this morning and asked me to accept this award on his behalf. One thing that I noted with Rob was that Andrew, myself and Rob have all shared the job of being the economist for the federal NDP. So we have that in common. First of all, I'm going to read some remarks that Andrew prepared. And then I'm going to add a few remarks of my own. These are Andrew's remarks. I'm deeply honored to be awarded the Charles Taylor Prize. I first read Taylor's work on politics in the socialist magazine Canadian Dimension in the late 1960s when I was still in high school. Taylor and his friend Ed Broadbent argued that liberal democracy was incomplete and limited, that the sway of the market and the power of capital had to be restrained to realize social and economic justice. From the 1960s to the 1980s, social democrats advocated regulation of business in the public interest, a robust welfare state, a mixed economy of public as well as private enterprises, and strong trade unions. That this agenda was undermined by globalization and free trade and by the ideological hegemony of neoliberalism. Thatcher's famous claim that there is no alternative was echoed by too many social democrats until it became clear that neoliberalism was not delivering for working people or the environment. Today we face the rupture of the liberal world order and a fundamental threat not just to social democracy, but to even the mainstream of liberal democracy. Trump is intent on undermining Canadian sovereignty. In establishing the Broadbent Institute, Ed sought to promote the enduring principles of social democracy. He also understood the importance of taking inspiration from the past while developing needed policies for today. He was pleased that the Institute has produced some serious work which is highly relevant to current circumstances and to the renewal and revitalization of the NDP. The battle of ideas is a necessary part of the struggle for fundamental social change. The power of an argument complements the need to put political force behind an argument. Thanks to the Broadbent Institute for assisting in the renewal of social democracy in troubled times. I'm just going to add some words of my own. As Rob mentioned, Andrew has made an enormous contribution to social, democratic, economic, social, and political research, debate, and policy in Canada as an economist and advisor of the federal NDP, as chief economist, and Director of Social and Economic Policy for the CLC, as a professor at York and Carleton Universities, Senior Policy Advisor to the Broadbent Institute, and through his numerous and frequent publications and media work. He has also been a mentor, inspiration, and friend to many, including Ed, and to a whole generation of researchers, policy wonks, and activists on the left, including his daughter Emma, who many of you will know. Andrew was a very close friend of Ed and was instrumental in getting the Broadbent Institute funded and off the ground. He is legendary in CLC and NDP circles for the intelligence, integrity, and productivity of his work, so much so that he was called Action Jackson. As well as being able to respond rapidly with great intelligence to the latest research or policy emergency, Andrew has always been able to take both a broad and long view of the challenges and possibilities for democratic socialism. He is extraordinarily well-read and able to zero in on the key issues and challenges we face in forging a more equitable and democratic future. This really shines through in Andrew's book, The Fire and the Ashes. It is a brilliant and succinct memoir, history and summary of key aspects of labor and left politics during his life, and a mapping of how to achieve plausible democratic socialist futures. As Tommy Douglas was fond of saying, dream no little dreams. And let's show how it can be done with popular democratic and worker control and confront the dystopic and somewhat fascistic future threatening us. Very sadly, Andrew can't be with us now. He is suffering from a very aggressive and cruel form of Parkinson's disease. He can no longer drive. He has difficulty writing, which is particularly hard for someone who is such a superb writer. And Parkinson's is also affecting his speech. But the last thing that Andrew would want is for us to feel sorry for him. Instead, he would want us to carry on the fight for a more equal, democratic, and just society with the same intelligence, commitment, integrity, passion, compassion, humility, and generosity that Andrew has demonstrated throughout his life. I know we can, and I hope we will. Thank you.
And now, to join us for a special announcement of the Ellen Meekson Wood Prize and Lecture, I'd like to welcome to the stage Amy Peng, Dean of Arts at Toronto Metropolitan University.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to join you here today at the Broadbent Institute 2026 Progressive Summit, Defending Democracy Across Borders. As the largest annual progressive movement conference in Canada, the Progressive Summit has become an important space for political dialogue, for debate, and for building practical solutions to the challenge facing our democracy today. So Toronto Metropolitan University is proud to have developed a strong and meaningful partnership with the Broadbent Institute over the years. The Institute is a valued partner of the Toronto Democracy Internship. And since 2023, the Faculty of Arts at TMU has proudly hosted the annual Alan Mixing Wood Lecture. The lecture honors the life and work of Professor Alan Mixing Wood, who the Broadbent Institute lost in January 2016. Alan Mixing Wood was one of the most important democratic theorists of her generation. Her scholarship challenged us to rethink the history of democracy and reminded us that democracy is never simply given. As she argued so powerfully, democracy must always be struggled for and to secured from the below, never benevolently granted from above. To honor Alan's legacy, the Broadbent Institute established the annual Alan Mixing Wood Prize and Lecture, celebrating her work as an internationally renowned scholar, bring her ideas to new generations of thinkers, activists, and scholars. At this moment, when democracy institutions around the world are facing growing pressures, Alan's belief that democracy means nothing more nor less than people's power feels especially urgent and relevant. Each year, the $10,000 Alan Mixing Wood Prize is awarded to an academic, labor activist, or writer who has made an outstanding contribution to fields such as political theory, social and economic history, sociology, or human rights, reflecting Alan's enduring intellectual legacy. Now it's my great honor to announce this year's recipients to the Alan Mixing Wood Prize. Bhaskar Sunkara. Woo. Bhaskar Sunkara is the founding editor of Jacobin Magazine, the president of the Nation magazine, and the publisher of Catalyst, a journal of theory and strategy. Through his writing, editing, and organizing, Bhaskar has helped lay the intellectual groundwork for new generations of social democratic thought in the United States, Canada, and beyond. Many of the activists, scholars, and organizers gathered here today have engaged or been influenced by the ideas and debates that emerged from this work. His contributions have helped shape conversations about inequality, democracy, and political strategy across the progressive movement. We're therefore delighted to invite you all to hear directly from Bhaskar at the 2026 Alan Mixing Wood Lecture, which will take place in person at the Toronto Metropolitan University in Toronto on Wednesday, April 2nd. Mark your calendar now. So more information and tickets are available at the broadbentinstitute.ca. In previous years, the lecture has been featured remarkable thinkers, such as economist Isabella Weber and political commentator Grace Blakely, whose work has helped push important ideas like price caps on essential goods and new critiques or hyper-individualized politics into mainstream policy debates. The Alan Mixing Wood Lecture continues to bring cutting-edge progressive ideas into Canadian public conversation, and it remains one of the most exciting intellectual events we host at TMU each year. So I hope many of you will be able to join us. And now it is my pleasure to invite Francis Abel, Broadbent Fellow and the former students of Alan Mixing Wood, to share reflections on this year's prize recipient. Please join me in welcoming Francis Abel. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much. It is an honor to be here to participate in the announcement of the Ellen Mixing Wood Prize. Ellen's work presented an important alternative to liberal democracy and to the conversations that we're now having about the survival of democracy. She thought that real democracy could not develop unless the undemocratic core of capitalism is understood and overcome. Probably her most important book is called Democracy Against Capitalism. She believed that unless we understand and promote the conditions under which democracy can thrive, we will be unable to define and develop forms of real democracy, a democracy that can be enjoyed by all. And she devoted her life to this research. In recognition of Ellen's distinguished legacy of scholarship in the history of political thought, Ed Broadbent established the Ellen Mixing Wood Prize, a $10,000 award given annually to an academic, labor activist, writer, political or social theorist, human rights writer, or a sociologist. As Ellen's former student and her lifelong friend, and as a member of the Ellen Mixing Wood Selection Committee, it's my honor to be here to talk about Bhaskar Sankara, who has been selected for this prize this year. Ellen believed deeply in encouraging the new generation of socialists to rethink our project, key to the social and class movements of our time. As the founding editor of Jacobin magazine, Bhaskar Sankara helped lay the intellectual foundations for his generation's socialist movements, much in the way that the New Left Review or Socialist Register or Canadian Dimension did for the 1960s and on, or Canadian Forum did for the CCF in the 1920s. Founded in New York in 2010, Jacobin has grown to be an essential forum for leftist analysis and debate. The spin-offs from Jacobin, like its German, Spanish, Portuguese, Greek, and Dutch language versions, the journal Catalyst, or the spin-off revival of Tribune in the UK, have offered models for the Canadian left. the Broadbent Institute's Perspectives, a Canadian journal of political economy and social democracy, is our iteration of that. Now, Jacobin is very familiar to the Democratic Socialists of America who've been here at our conference, but it has also opened its pages to the Canadian left. My co-conspirator in much work with Ed Broadbent, Luke Savage, has published there frequently and steadily since 2014, bringing a Canadian analysis to US affairs and bringing an analysis of Canadian affairs to American and international readers. Bhaskar also recognized the moment in New York, helping to lay the intellectual foundation for New York Mayor Zoran Mamdani's historic campaign. Jacobin has been a platform for Mamdani since his initial 2020 run for New York State Assembly. They published an interview, his initial interview in Jacobin, entitled Roti and Roses for All. The latest issue features Mamdani on the cover on the subject of municipal socialism, which I know is a topic here for this summit. In short, Bhaskar is helping to build the democratic socialist left for his generation in his own country and in Canada and elsewhere. I invite you to join us on April 22nd at Toronto Metropolitan Museum for the 2026 Alan Makeson's Wood Lecture featuring Bhaskar Sankara. I look forward to hearing from him and participating in the development of his vision for our movement. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Francis, for those thoughtful words of reflection. Congratulations once again to this year's Broadbent Prize winners. I look forward to seeing many of you on April 22nd for the Ellen Meskins Wood Lecture at TMU.
Woo! So, speaking of, this year's lecture will come at a moment when Canadian media is facing not just uncertainty, but outright threats. As we heard yesterday, press progress is at the center of what could be one of the biggest, longest, and most expensive media trials in Canadian history. And over the past few days, we've asked for your help to help win this fight. I saw plenty of folks dropping by their booth yesterday, chatting with their investigative reporters on the big stories they've broken, whether that's on crony politicians, union-busting corporations, or run-of-the-mill bigotry and exploitation.
So we wanted to take a moment to remind you that it is not too late to donate to the Press Progress Journalism Defense Fund. In fact, by scanning the QR code up on the screen, oh yeah, that screen, the one I can't see.
Okay,
Scanning the QR code up on the screen. You can do that right now. And if you donate $25 or more, you can stop by the Press Progress booth and pick up your own beautiful union-made Defend Journalism pin, which I have pinned on me somewhere here. Here, yes, beautiful pin. Made by the Broadbent Institute's print partner, Cavan. If the QR code is not for you, you can go to the booth and donate in person. It is not too late to show your support with a donation and take a pin home with you today. We really need your support to defend journalism, and this is the first part of this fight. These folks are not going to stop, and we need to be ready.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so over the past year, Canadians have faced tariff-driven economic uncertainty, a high cost of living, and rising unemployment. Many people expect an all-of-government response to the crisis. But are the Carney government's priorities actually meeting this moment? In the next panel, we're going to hear about new research released here at the 2026 Progress Summit on how Canadians see this new era of tariff-driven uncertainty.
We are so excited to welcome Jordan Leichnitz, Broadbent Leadership Fellow and the Canada Director of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, who will present findings from a joint research project with the Broadbent Institute, Defending Jobs in a Trade War, Canadian Perspectives on Work, Security, and Economic Trust. Walking us through what Canadians are saying about work, security, and economic trust in this moment of uncertainty, her presentation will be followed by a panel discussion to dig deeper into the report and to learn more about the policy responses that might actually meet this moment. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Jordan Leichnitz.
Good morning, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here. Bonjour tout le monde. Ça fait un très grand plaisir d'être ici ce matin. Pour ceux qui ne la connaissent pas, la Fondation Friedrich Ebert, c'est une autre, en fait, une fondation politique socio-démocrate. Elle est la plus ancienne et la plus grande fondation en Allemagne, dont compris des bureaux dans plus que 100 pays tout partout au monde. Et sa mission est de soutenir la démocratie, les droits humains et la solidarité. So it's a great pleasure to be here today to brief you on this report, which I co-authored with Broadbent Institute's own Clement Nokos, who's hiding off stage, so we can give him a little hand for his work in this. For those who like to follow along with the charts, you can find the report in the Whova app under this session if you want to read the full PDF. So let's jump right in. Okay, great. So what we did with this study is a deep dive into Canadians' views on labor, the economy, and finances now that we're a year into the trade war. It's based on a national online public opinion survey that was done from January 19th to January 26th, and it was conducted by the firm Viewpoints Research. And those of you who are attentive to dates would notice that right in the middle of this was Prime Minister Carney's speech at Davos on January 20th. So that's an interesting factor in the data. We received over 1,000 responses, so it's considered a nationally representative survey. And I'd like to give a special thanks to Natalie, Victoria, and James from Viewpoints for their work. So the data that we got out of the report gave us 5 key takeaways. And the first of them is that the economic growth agenda being put forward by the Canadian government right now is not made for everyone. The second is that generational divides matter now more than ever. The third is that jobs today are still about more than just money, but pay is key right now. The fourth is that unions are viewed right now as the defenders of jobs, and politicians are absolutely not. And the last is that right now, in this moment, grounded policy that impacts people's daily lives is resonating best. So jumping into it, we can see that right now in Canada, financial struggles for Canadians are a reality, and they are very deep. Only 1/3 of Canadians right now say that their finances are good. 2/3 describe their finances as fair, which means that they're just managing, but they don't have much room for extras, or poor or very poor, which means that they're falling behind on bills or they're struggling to get the basics they need to get by. Insecurity is uneven in Canada. Significantly more core working age Canadians, so that's people between 25 and 54 roughly, in the peak of their earning years, and significantly more working and lower class Canadians report feeling left behind economically. When it comes to how people are thinking about the future right now in the trade war, we see actually very deep partisan polarization in Canada. 62% of Conservatives, so that's 2/3, believe that Canada's best years are behind us. And only 22% think that the best is yet to come. But the inverse is true for the Liberals. 2/3, or 57%, think that the best is yet to come. And New Democrats, interestingly, are evenly split on this question. Bit of a glass half full situation, I guess. You might have seen in the news that there is generally significant public opinion support for Prime Minister Carney's economic plan. And that might be true, but when you look a little deeper into the numbers and when you ask Canadians if they believe that that plan is actually going to make a difference in their household and their lives, the data looks very different. Just a quarter of Canadians think that the Prime Minister's economic plan will leave them better off. 42% think that it will make no difference, and 15% think it's going to make things worse for them. And in all of this data, generational divides are huge. Young workers in their core earning years are the most pessimistic about the future out of all age groups. And this isn't surprising when you think about the recent past. The average 35-year-old has lived their entire adult life through economic crisis, beginning with the 2008 financial crisis when they graduated high school. Then they entered the job market in the oil price collapse in the mid-2010s that shocked youth unemployment. They lived through COVID-19, economic shutdown, through the housing affordability crisis, and now through the US trade war. So today's younger Canadians have actually never experienced a period of prolonged growth for the Canadian economy, and this deeply shapes their economic views about the future. We also ask people open-ended questions about their views on work, and we all know that jobs are more than just income. They're also about identity, they're about dignity, they're about autonomy, they're about contributing to society. And most Canadians agree that jobs are about earning income and about contributing to the country. But right now, 46% of core working-age Canadians don't feel secure in their current job. And that's actually not surprising when you look at the data. Canada is facing record-high youth unemployment. And so in this context, when you ask people what they think and leave it open to them, they are talking most about the need for security and good pay in the work that they do. One thing that's really striking is how modest people's hopes are for what makes a good job right now. When we asked open-ended questions, this is the type of thing that people told us. They want to make enough to pay for necessities, a living wage that lets you live, not just survive. I want good health coverage for me and my family, and decent vacation time. I'd like a permanent position, not a contract, a secure job with consistent hours. These are really, really basic things. Nobody's asking for the moon. They're about dignity and respect and being able to support your family, see them from time to time, and about security. In this research, we also found that Canadians are definitely able to diagnose structural problems with the economy. When we asked open-ended questions about what feels unfair about Canada's economy today, people tended to point to things like scarce jobs, high costs, and low wages. And that made up 40% of all responses. But at the same time, when we asked them about solutions, people tended to point to individual things, like their pay, their benefits, their contracts. At the same time, even though job security and pay are so important to people right now, people are also looking for quality of life. In fact, in equal measure, 37% each, Canadians prioritized better work-life balance right alongside better pay. So Canadian workers are not interested in an either-or. They don't want to trade off a quality of life where they can see their family and have good balance for better pay. They want to have it both. We also asked in the crisis, who do Canadians think are coming to help them? When jobs are in danger, when a company closes down, when a major plant relocates, who shows up? And it is by far and away trade unions who are seen as the ones who come through at 34%. They have built credibility through presence on the ground in moments of crisis with Canadians, and that is recognized whether or not Canadian workers belong to a union. Federal politicians, however, and business leaders, you can see them, if you have a magnifying glass, right down on the bottom of the list, with 13% and 11%. And interestingly, there's almost no difference between how federal political parties are viewed when it comes to responding to Canadians who are in crisis in their community because of job losses. The Conservatives don't enjoy a statistical advantage here, but neither does the federal NDP. So, by far and away, the biggest generational split we identified in this research is on openness to unions. 64% of young workers, so that's workers aged 18 to 34, would be very or somewhat likely to join a union if given a chance. And this was a question that we asked only to people who were not already in a union. So there is a huge appetite for organizing there. Canadians might be skeptical about the benefits they're going to get from the government's plans, but they clearly see the labor movement as the front line of defense of jobs in this trade war. We also looked at what solutions Canadians are interested in during this crisis. And we did find that Canadians generally support government involvement to promote job creation, to protect jobs, and to deliver economic security. But they really doubt the government's ability to deliver. 65% of Canadians think that the government needs to act on Canadian jobs through a program to create jobs. Only 12% think it should be left to the private sector alone. And 34% would support some sort of a jobs guarantee, with that support being highest among younger Canadians. But, and this is an important one, Canadians don't believe in the government's ability to deliver on these promises. When we asked how believable, for example, it would be for the Canadian government to implement a jobs guarantee, almost half, 47% of Canadians, didn't think that the federal government would have the credibility to pull it off. And finally, when it comes to what Canadians think a job creation program should look like, people's top priorities, by a long shot, are jobs in the care economy, in the skilled trades, and in the affordable housing sector. And this is such a stark contrast, of course, to what we've seen from the priorities of Prime Minister Carney's government so far, which has not made investments in healthcare, childcare, or elder care, and has in fact cut spending on affordable housing. So I'd like to, at this point, invite up to the stage 3 amazing panelists to help me unpack the data in this report. Frédéric Ebol is the Director of Strategic Planning for the Social Democratic Party of Germany. Troy Cochrane is the Canadian Labour Congress Senior Economist, and Marzian Alam is the Ontario NDP's Director of Research. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, so there was a lot of data in that report, and I know you are all data nerds in one way or the other, so this is a great fit to have you here today. I'm going to start with you, Marzian. So we heard yesterday from the President of the Canadian Labour Congress, Bea Bruce, Magali Picard of the FTQ, and Barry Sawyer of UFCW about how intensely workers are under pressure during this trade war. And we've seen, of course, thousands of job losses in the auto sector and the manufacturing sector in steel. And a lot of this has been concentrated in Ontario. Could you talk to us a little bit, what are you seeing on the ground in terms of people's sense of economic security at the moment, and what is it doing politically?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of what you're talking about, this economic insecurity that people are feeling, where while Ford is, our premier is getting to play Captain Canada and getting this gift from Trump and the U.S. government, by being able to distract from all of the ways that, all the urgent issues that people are facing here in Ontario. We're seeing, thousands of job losses. We're seeing long-term unemployment at the highest rate it's been in almost 30 years. And we're seeing youth unemployment increasing as opportunities are drying up for young people. And we're seeing how a lot of Ford's decisions and government decisions have led to some of these job losses. And that they're not taking the opportunities to, the government's not taking the opportunities to solidify our local supply chains, and instead are giving subsidies to companies that are packing up and leaving and taking their equipment with them. We're seeing how his decision to reduce the Canadian content requirements in transit projects led to thousands of job losses in Thunder Bay. And more than that, I think one of the biggest impacts we're seeing and we're hearing from is young people. Young people are really feeling the impact of the uncertainty and hopelessness, I think, that we were mentioning in some of the reports today. Life is getting more expensive for people, and quality of access and quality and access to public services is declining, and opportunities are drying up for young people. But we're seeing that there's a lot of hope or like hopelessness that folks are feeling. They want to see big swings from the government on what can help create jobs for them. There are examples that we can draw from in other parts of the world. We saw in the UK, they established a youth jobs guarantee to be able to get young people working with municipalities and nonprofits to get people into the workforce, and how that's helping people to feel purposeful and find dignity in their work. And then there's other smaller examples that we can look at. We can look at in New York, where the small example of how the Mayor Mamdani cleared the sidewalks after the snowstorm. That's the kind of small opportunities that we can take advantage of, work with municipalities to find where are the gaps in our communities that young people or anybody can get into the workforce and get working and feel purposeful, like they're contributing to their community.
That's great. Thanks, Marzanne. Yeah, I think that New York example is such an interesting one. Troy, I wanted to ask you, one of the findings that I think was the most striking in the report is the huge gap between public support in a theoretical sense for big macroeconomic infrastructure development, AI, a lot of the things the Prime Minister has talked about, but just such a clear belief among people that those types of things are not going to improve their own household economic situation. As an economist, how do you think about that gap?
Thank you for the question. A lot of the gap has to do with the disconnect between what we think our economy is and what our economy actually is. So the impression that's created by Prime Minister Carney and the Liberals, the way they're describing our economy, is rooted in, frankly, an outdated mode of the economy, which is that the majority of adult jobs are jobs in the goods-producing sectors, in the trades. And these jobs exist, they're very important, but our goods-producing sector is about 20% of all jobs. The service sector is 80% of all jobs. So people in that service sector, they're not seeing themselves represented in the kinds of things that the Carney government is offering. Mark Carney's approach to how we're going to deal with these issues is him thinking like an investment banker, not him thinking like a government. An investment banker only thinks about investment in terms of what you can own. So that's going to be these like big infrastructure pieces. And we absolutely need these things. These have to be part of the picture. I'm not saying that protecting trade jobs is unimportant. It's absolutely important, but it can't end there. We have to also be talking about how we're going to ensure that people who work in other parts of the economy can have certainty and not just be thrown to the wolves of the market when the entire economy turns. And that's what people are feeling in this moment, that their job could go away, and then where are they actually going to go? One of the other results in the survey that I thought was interesting, that a lot of people, they felt decently secure in their own position. A lot of their concern was for their friends, families, their loved ones, and I think that is a really important finding for two reasons. One, we're often told that electorally, we have to be offering something to people. People have to see, like, what am I getting out of this? But people aren't as narrowly selfish as we're often told. We do concern ourselves with our broader community. So their concern for how their friends and family and children and neighbors are going to fare in the economy as it continues to evolve under all of this uncertainty speaks to the need and the potential for offering policies that they recognize will benefit those people, even if they themselves are feeling decently secure. So we need to be hearing from the government what it's going to do for people in other parts of the economy especially in the care economy, which is actually under attack by the Carney government. The care economy itself is about 20% of jobs. Meanwhile, they're making cuts within sectors that are part of the care economy. The care economy has grown despite ongoing government undermining of its importance. Support for the care economy supports our well-being, but it can also be a major economic driver, which is not something we ever hear from the government.
Yeah, that's such a good point. It was a really striking difference. Friederike, one of the things that really stood out in the report, and I think stood out to folks in the room too, was the degree to which unions are seen as the actors who show up when jobs are at risk, and politicians are not. You've talked about the credibility gap that social democratic parties face when it comes to actually delivering change. So in this moment when, among the public, I think it's fair to say that patience for politics is pretty low, how do you think that parties can rebuild trust in the idea that government can be a vehicle for delivering meaningful change in people's lives, especially if you're not in government? How do you think about that question? Just a small one.
Yes. Thanks a lot for having me here, and thanks for the presentation. And I would be really interested when we would conduct that in Germany, what people answering, but I think we have so many similarities, and when I listen to you, actually, I could tell you so many things about our last campaign because it was actually built on the question, what's in for you? And we weren't successful with that because people are caring for other people. And so, yeah, but let me concentrate on your question because I think, just for your information, I mean, Germany is an industrial country and we're facing enormous transformation right now in Germany. My colleagues from North Rhine-Westphalia, this is actually the area where it's taking place right now. So it's not the question actually if we will have a transformation, it's just taking place now, and it's the question, can we actually do that in a just and a climate neutral way? So Germany is actually an export-driven company. Every international development in regard to tariffs, whatever, is hitting us really, really hard. And so in these difficult times, actually, to see that people trust in unions, especially in Canada, I think that's a good message. And because also for us German Democrats, unions are our allies. So I actually take two things out of it. It's one, we have to support trade unions where we can as Social Democrats. And for example, what we did in Germany a couple of months ago is that we try to support them in a political way. For example, that we, when you do your tax declaration at the end, that you get actually a subsidy for being a trade union member. Or for example, what we actually tried in our last government is that we condemn or that we put penalties on union busting, for example. So actually, to look how you can support that when you, I mean, right now we are in government, so we have some ways to do that. But on the other hand, of course, that's the more difficult question. I mean, trust, ask yourself, how do you gain trust? Or what is happening if you disappoint a friend? How difficult is it to gain that trust back? And I mean, it's the same question for politicians. And I discussed it, or I tried to talk about it yesterday. I mean, it's the point of being there again and again and again. And right now, for example, we have a big fight against one of the biggest chemical company, which has a big how do you say that? A big dependency in Berlin, and they want to actually lay off, I think, 3,000 or 4,000 jobs to India. And what we're trying as the Social Democrats in Berlin is to be there, to talk to the Workers' Council, talk to the union, support the workers, show them we are here with you. We try actually to fight with you to actually leave the jobs here in Berlin, but it's a really hard way. And I think, yes, just to be in your communities, be present. And in 2 weeks, actually, we have an election in a Western federal state, and we have a really, really good candidate, and there's a big hope that he will win the election. And what we can see is exactly what he's doing. He is there at every meeting, in bars, in clubs, in sports clubs. He is every day on the streets, and yeah, and I think that's like him. And let me just say another thing, which I think is really important, and maybe this can also refer to you, what you just said. I think what we miss, and this is what we miss right now also at the Social Democratic Party in Germany, is to have a vision what is actually happening after the transformation. What do we have to offer to people when we actually transform ourselves in a different way? And you talked about it, not only for our industry jobs, but also for another people who work in the public sector. And yeah, to ask yourself, what's your vision in 2030? What's your story? And in German, our Social Democratic, we have many, many good Social Democrats from the past, and we always referring to them, and Willy Brandt, Helmut Schmidt, who shaped Europe, who shaped the Social Democratic international movement. But what's the story for the future? Who is there, and what's our points? And I think also to let people know we have a vision for the future, and I hope we will actually, maybe we can write it together.
That would be great. Troy, I want to come back to you on that point, actually. So the report clearly found that most Canadians are in support of government involvement in order to help protect and defend jobs and create jobs in Canada. But then there was such a huge gap in their belief that the government could get it done. So we had about half of people who thought that it wasn't credible for the government to implement something like a jobs guarantee. So I'm wondering if you could kind of pick up where you left off and talk a little bit about what you think a credible jobs offer would look like for the federal government right now in the midst of this trade war.
So people's skepticism about what government can do has come from two forces. One is a relentless narrative that government is inefficient, that business is efficient, and we need to constrain government as much as possible in order to allow business to flourish. This is based on zero actual evidence. It's just merely asserted, but it's been asserted for so long that even many workers, people in this room probably have just come to accept that, well, I don't necessarily like that, but that seems to be the truth. And we need to confront and overturn that narrative and make people understand something that is clearly true, that every other part of the economy is utterly dependent on things that government does. Part of the problem is that when government is working well, it's mostly invisible. We're mostly aware of it when it's not working well. The other part of why this attitude has come to be is that governing parties, many of them, don't want government to be doing well. So they're not doing the work to ensure that it's doing all of the things that it can actually do. So then we have the experience of going to government to try to access some basic service and just running into roadblocks. This is the product of trying to relentlessly roll back government. Despite that effort, the size of the public sector has never actually shrank. All that's happened is we've got less coordination between governments and within governments. Government has just gotten less effective. It hasn't actually gotten any smaller. And so people are understandably skeptical. So how do we make them believe that a job guarantee is something the government could deliver? Well, we need to have a little bit more detail. What are we talking about when we say a job guarantee? At the moment, it's a little bit fuzzy, and there's room to have a discussion about what people would actually want from that. There is no reason why someone who wants a job should ever go without a job when we all know there's a ton of work to be done. So what's the disconnect? The disconnect is that we've allowed the private sector to have primary responsibility for job creation. It will only create jobs if it sees a profit opportunity in that. There's tons of work where there's no clear means to profit. That doesn't mean the work shouldn't be done. So trying to develop a program that people believe the government can deliver, that they believe can be part of the safety net. If I lose my job, I at least know that this is there in the meantime while I try to find another job. It sets a floor so the private sector can't go below that floor in terms of pay and benefits. But the actual design of this program, we all need to be involved in that. What are we actually looking for, while also understanding that government can do these things. government is doing a lot of things incredibly effectively. Canada has a very stable financial system. That's not given to us by the banks. That's not given to us by the investment bankers. That's given to us by the government. Government regulation and all of the work that goes around that. So understanding that government has this essential role for the private sector as well, and that it can be the employer that people can rely on, or that they're going to deliver programs that people can rely on, so they're never without a job when they want and need a job.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that would be a much better outcome for so many people right now who are struggling to find work that pays decently. So thank you for that, Troy. Marzian, I want to go to you next. One of the findings that we had in the report that I didn't get to add into the presentation, but that was really interesting was people's views on AI and automation. So we asked a number of questions about that, and people had opinions. So we had about 6 in 10 Canadians telling us that they believe that AI is going to harm workers, is going to cost jobs, and is going to hurt their economic prospects. So when you look at data like that, you know, as you're operating in the space sort of between policy and politics there, what kinds of policies do you think governments should be looking at in order to make sure that these sorts of technological changes are benefiting workers, not displacing them? And do you see political opportunity there in taking that issue on?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of the anxieties that people are feeling about how AI is going to impact their work and their lives are opportunities for the government to get involved, step up, and regulate the use of AI in a way that favors consumers and workers. You know, one of the ways that we're seeing that is a way to support Canadian technologies instead of being reliant on technologies from other countries. We have opportunities to, you know, look at the processes of how AI is used and ensure that there's a human component to how AI is you know, used in the workforce and in our public services. But I think that there are 2 big opportunities I think we have to regulate AI, and the government needs to step up and be able to do that. And I think that the 2 that come to mind are on dynamic pricing and how AI has impacted consumers, and how businesses are seeing this opportunity to you know, change prices based on supply and demand and you know, consumer choices. On top of the privacy and the, you know, fairness concerns that people have, it's going to impact affordability. It's going to impact how people are experiencing, you know, their regular expenses like groceries and things like that. We've seen how things like airline flights use dynamic pricing to change based on demand, and we've seen how that even in moments of crises that the airlines will still jack up the prices. We don't want to be buying groceries that way, and so there's opportunities there for the government to step up and regulate the use of AI in those spaces. The other really big one, and you know, just an incident that happened recently, the government has a responsibility to prevent tragedies like what we saw in Tumbler Ridge. There's a, you know, we saw that there were opportunities for the company to have stepped up, but then when we take it back 1 step further, there was a big opportunity for the government to have stepped up and required companies to have mandatory reporting requirements. Right now, a lot of the AI reporting requirements are voluntary or self-regulated, and we need the governments to step up to be able to protect people and ensure that, you know, wherever there are opportunities to prevent things, tragedies like that we take them. We're seeing, you know, we saw places like the UK and EU implement AI regulations to make sure that there's, you know, a human component, or to make sure that there's a public benefit in all these use cases, and that there's more fairness and transparency. We need our government to be able to step up and make sure that we have some of those protections as well.
Yeah, that's such a good point, and I think the tragedy at Tumbler Ridge has sparked a really urgent conversation about the need for that kind of mandatory reporting and regulation. So I'm sure we haven't heard the last of that. Frederike, I want to come to you for the last question, because there's a really interesting tension in these findings that has to do with generations. So younger Canadians in the survey, they were the most pessimistic about the economy and the future. but they were the most open to unions, the most open to government action, and the most open to new economic policies to confront these challenges. Does this resonate with what you're seeing in Europe? And if it does, how do you think political parties can turn that openness among younger people into political engagement and maybe even support?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I think it resonates definitely what we can see in Europe right now. We also have we can see in our numbers that many young people also are really worried about the economic future. And at the same time, they are quite open to collective solutions. So this is also, I think, resonates with your results in regard of unions and stuff like that. And for us, it's always the question, how can we actually build avenues for participation of young people? And I will tell you two examples where we didn't do that well. It was first, we just had a discussion about a compulsory military service in Germany. And we didn't actually talk to young people. We didn't talk with the associations, with pupils and stuff like that. And after that, we had many manifestations or demonstrations from young people in front of our headquarters in Berlin. And now we have a discussion about regulation of social media, for example. And we did the same thing. And this is now actually where I thought, okay, we have now two experiences where we know this is highly, highly important for young people. We have to change something. We have to build avenues to let them on our table, to invite them to our tables and to discuss that with them. And for us, it's the key, actually. And I'm also coming from the youth movement. And I know how I was so angry with my older comrades when they didn't invite me for topics where I was actually yes, involved. Sorry. So I think, yes, we can do better. And for example, I'm new. Since 4 months, I actually have the position. And my wish is also for my colleagues from North Rhine-Westphalia, we will have an election next year, that we have a program, a special program only for people under 25. Because we know that this target group, they want to be special and they want to be addressed special. So actually, maybe we can do that and realize that together, that we will make it happen, that we have in every election a special program only for people under 25. And this is not standard in Germany, but maybe we can implement this as a standard.
Yeah, sounds like a great idea. They certainly have a unique economic experience, as we found in our report as well. Thank you so much. Please join me, everybody, in thanking Friederike, Troy, and Marzian for their insights. We're now going to move to a short break, so you can stretch your legs, you can get a coffee. Please meet back here at 10:45. We're going to have our next panel on digital sovereignty and democratic AI. And following that, we're going to have our closing fireside chat on progressive mayoral wins in Toronto and New York City. So we'll see you at 10:45.
Allô, 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 tout le monde. On va recommencer. Je vais vous demander de prendre vos places. D'accord. Alors, je vais essayer quelque chose qu'on fait dans l'école pour ma petite qui va en jardin. Je vais dire quelque chose, je vais vous demander de me faire un rappel, OK? Alors, je vais dire 1, 2, 3, vous m'attendez, et puis vous dites oui, on vous entend. 1, 2, 3, vous m'entendez? Une autre fois. 1, 2, 3, vous m'entendez? Okay, parfait. Merci tout le monde. All right, everyone. I hope you got your coffee because this next panel is going to get into the weeds on a side of the sovereignty debate that we don't often hear about online or in mainstream media. Canada is deeply dependent on US tech giants for our digital infrastructure, our data, and increasingly artificial intelligence. The platforms where we debate, organize, learn, and connect aren't publicly governed spaces. They're privately owned systems shaped by foreign laws and corporate interests. This lack of digital sovereignty is perhaps one of Canada's largest democratic deficits. And if we're serious about nation building, we have to ask, where is the commitment to public digital infrastructure, to democratic control over AI, to digital sovereignty as a pillar of a strong, independent democracy? So to guide us through this critical conversation, we are joined by an excellent panel. And moderating this session is Clement Nokas, Director of Policy and Engagement at the Broadbent Institute and Editor-in-Chief of Perspectives, a Canadian journal of political economy and social democracy. Joining him is Paris Marks, author and host of the podcast Tech Won't Save Us, Sarah Ryan, Senior Research Officer with the Canadian Union of Public Employees, Laurent Carbonneau, Vice-President of Policy and Advocacy at the Council of Canadian Innovators, and Mia Travers Hayward, Research and Policy Analyst with the Canadian Teachers Federation. Please join me in welcoming them on stage.
Good morning, everyone. I see some people from the karaoke last night made it out. So excuse my voice, that is the result of last night's affairs. Again, my name is Clement Nokas, Director of Policy Engagement for the Broadbent Institute, and I'm really excited to finally be having this discussion on building real digital sovereignty and democratic AI. And I want this discussion to help equip progressives with the views, positions, and knowledge to engage in public discourse on digital sovereignty and AI, because honestly, it's what we're all talking about right now, but we haven't had these discussions yet on stage at the Progress Summit. Though we have this panel right now, we've actually been discussing the issue across the summit. We've had our speakers and panels across the programming speak to the bigger picture on these issues. And I also really liked, if you tuned into the keynote from David Adler just yesterday, he showed us his phone / personal intimate partner he joked about. And now this isn't an ad, but the phone I'm reading off of is also, it's a Fairphone 6. It's not an ad, but you can only buy these in the European Union. It's a de-Googled device that also maintains a kill switch on the side here for the microphone, the camera, something that a lot of surveillance experts say you probably should consider. It's got built-in tracker blocking, fake geolocation, an IP address obscurity application, and I'm waving this around too because it's also a very sometimes challenging to use phone to make the point that it's also not enough despite all its security features. Kind of like a vaccine, to fully work, it depends on the devices of the people around you and their digital footprints to also have that level of security. And all of that data is still likely sitting in servers based in Palo Alto, California, outside the jurisdiction of where I'm using this phone right now in Ottawa, Ontario. So I'd also not be remiss to mention the role AI and data sovereignty have played in ongoing wars and genocides, on surveillance and social isolation, on the failure to keep people safe for the success of market valuation and profit. So it's given me a lot to think about, and I know this conversation has been in demand for some time for the Institute's Science and Tech for All research stream. So it's my pleasure to welcome you to this conversation. And I want us to take away from this discussion some answers, or at least some starting questions on answers to the question, how do we make digital sovereignty and public, democratically controlled AI for the public good into real nation-building initiatives? And so, for my first question, I'm going to ask my friend here, Paris Marks, what are the major issues with Canada's current approaches to AI technology and digital sovereignty?
It's a great question. I wish I could one-up you right now and like pull out a flip phone and say, you know, but no.
Pull out a brick.
Yeah, I do have one of those actually. I'm still in the iPhone life, unfortunately. But yeah, I think it's an essential question that we all need to be asking right now, right? Especially, you know, I think that this has been a discussion that we should have been having for quite some time, but especially seeing the return of Donald Trump to the U.S. presidency, the way that, you know, he has leveraged the power of the United States against, you know, allies and enemies alike, but also the way that we have seen Silicon Valley billionaires then kind of take advantage of their relationship with Donald Trump to use the US state to try to kind of serve their ends in countries around the world, right? And of course, we've seen that recently with the repeal of the digital services tax and other questions about kind of tech regulation within Canada. But of course, you know, we're also heading into the renegotiation of CUSMA, which also contains a lot of provisions that limit our ability to regulate US tech companies and kind of be the masters of our own destiny on technology. And so really, you know, if we look at the approaches that the government is taking at the moment, or kind of the discussions that are happening, you know, one of my biggest criticisms is that I think we're not actually seeing enough focus on digital sovereignty and on the technologies that we're using. You know, we're certainly talking a lot about how we need to be in much greater control of, you know, the military arms that we're using, you know, building up the military, making sure we have more sovereignty in that dimension. But I would say, you know, okay, we can have more arms, but if those kind of, you know, pieces of military equipment are running on US-based software, then, you know, are we really, you know, kind of carving out that sovereignty and independence that we're thinking? And that is, of course, just one example. You know, we have our government that is dependent on Microsoft services for a large part, and other public institutions that are dependent on US technologies as well. Technologies that we have learned in the past year can easily be kind of taken away at the whims of the United States. And of course, we saw this with the sanctions against the International Criminal Court and various judges on the court, including a Canadian judge, where after they were sanctioned, they lost access to their Microsoft accounts, to their Amazon accounts, to banking services. You know, if someone kind of goes against the whims of the United States, they can very easily be cut off because we are so dependent on these US systems, on these US platforms, on these US networks. And so then if we're looking at the approach of the government, certainly we have heard talk of, you know, sovereign cloud, you know, kind of building out data centers within Canada to be used for Canadian purposes, instead of relying on data centers and cloud services from Amazon, Microsoft, and Google for, you know, who are kind of the major providers in that space. We have also, of course, heard more discussion about procuring from Canadian companies and the like, but I would argue that if we were serious about digital sovereignty in the Canadian context, that we would be talking much more about you know, placing much more emphasis on developing technologies within Canada for us to use. Obviously, that doesn't mean that, you know, as kind of Clem was saying, looking at his phone and all the things that go into making a smartphone, I don't think Canada alone is going to be able to build every piece of that, right? But I think it's for us to kind of pick out the things that make sense and then look for allies that we can trust, whether those are in Europe, whether those are in Japan or South Korea or Brazil or Australia or places like that, where we can work with these people to kind of collectively build out these things with partners who we feel that we can trust and rely on, you know, for the longer term. And the one other piece that I would add to that is that I would say the government right now is very much focused on what the private sector within Canada can do to help us achieve digital sovereignty, to help us build out more kind of technological capacity within Canada. But I would say the flip side to that is that I think that we need to be focusing much more on what the public sector can do as well, certainly to build out technologies that are going to serve the public sector, serve public institutions, you know, a platform for the government to run on, things that we're already seeing governments in France, Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, you know, start to build out, but that we should really be be putting a much greater focus on that, and potentially even seeing that there's a role for a public institution in the way that we have a public postal service, though, you know, it's under threat at the moment, and certainly a public broadcaster to step in and, you know, kind of offer an alternative to what the private sector can provide that is focused on, you know, the well-being, the needs of Canadians, and not necessarily, you know, needing to turn a profit and things like that. So I think that there's a much wider discussion that we need to have than the one that we're currently seeing at the moment.
And in this discussion too, we have, especially in Canada here, concerns about US big tech. And to turn it to Laurent, how does surrendering Canadian digital sovereignty to US big tech companies threaten Canadian democracy?
Sure. So a thing I'm very thankful for is that the electrical panel in my house is in my house. So I can turn off my lights, you know, I can go down there and start fiddling with it, and at least I know it's me doing it. If that stuff's in your neighbor's house, you know, the apartment at the end of the hallway, you start being concerned, because at the end of the day, you know, you may like your neighbor, could be a perfectly good guy, but you don't know if he's going to be there in 5 years. You don't know who's going to be buying the house after that, who's moving to that apartment. It creates a risk for you that you don't actually control your own light switches. You don't have your own water shut off. So that's kind of the situation we find ourselves in, where over the past 30, 40 years, we've built out all this digital infrastructure, and really very, very heavily in the last 20 years, and accelerating rapidly. And we don't have a lot of control over it. And that's not just to say that the actual physical infrastructure is in Canada. That is part of it. But web traffic gets routed through the US. There's extraterritorial jurisdiction through the Cloud Act and FISA in the US. So the US has built lots of tools to kind of, that we were very happy to go along with, because it was convenient, it was cheap, it made sense economically. The business case has gotten a lot worse for Canadians, because it's created a lot of risks. So I think from our point of view, and honestly, I'd echo a lot of what Paris was saying. We don't have every capability in Canada to do this tomorrow overnight. Like, it's just not the case. But there's a roadmap to doing this, a lot more of it ourselves, and that's something that I think that's a big role for the public sector in how it strategizes and around procuring from innovators, which I think is a really important and underused tool of industrial policy that we've kind of left on the shelf in Canada, because we, often in the comparative industrial policy world, people single out Canada as a bit of a Boy Scout of being very hesitant to use tools, and I think in the era of an elbowsy approach to economic policy, that should perhaps be re-examined. So all of those pieces, I think looking forward to how we can have that light switch or that electrical panel back in our own basement would be a really something to work towards in the medium term, and doing everything we can in the short term to kind of at least isolate off any really critical dependencies, because in terms of the democratic angle of this, the government we're dealing with in the US doesn't really deal in good faith. I think if we want to protect our sovereignty and thus our democracy, this isn't really optional. It's really part of controlling your own critical infrastructure, and we wouldn't let the US own and operate all of our interprovincial highways, so we shouldn't let them do this either.
That's it. And now to Sarah. No, this actually, what Laurent was just saying, kind of brings to mind to me, once upon a time, I was a public civil servant, and I was made to use a system for documents called GC Docs. And, other people know what that is, unfortunately. Big fans of GC Docs in the house. But, it is, that is kind of an exercise in digital sovereignty, right? But then I also see some of my colleagues then being like, GC Docs kind of sucks. I'm going to use the Google Suite. And so this is federal government work that's now, this was also in the last decade or so, in servers in Palo Alto. These servers are now being used to comb through those documents for AI models. And so, there isn't this sort of in-house security, this scrutiny regarding our own federal government's function. So I'd like to ask you, how is this lack of scrutiny around digital sovereignty and security on AI threatening jobs, services, and public trust in Canada?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's a huge issue right now, and the reality is when we talk about jobs, technology can make jobs better, but it can also make jobs worse. And with AI, we're looking at particular types of risks. So we've really kind of created these buckets when we talk with our members about the risks. Job loss and work restructuring, that's what we hear about in the media a lot of the time, but also AI-powered surveillance and monitoring in the workplace. And then we have the data from surveillance and monitoring getting fed through algorithms to make recommendations to employers. This could be around which workers to hire, how to set staffing levels, to set workers' schedules and assign them tasks, but it can also be used for discipline and discharge cases. And then we look at bias and discrimination, because we know that AI tools, their training data includes biased and discriminatory data. The algorithm can have issues as well, so we really need to look at the harms that can be perpetrated there. So just to give you some examples, I mean, we do have KP members who have already lost their jobs due to AI in the communications and healthcare sectors. We know that some workers are being asked to wear geolocation bracelets throughout their work shifts that track their exact location throughout their entire shift and provide performance data to their employers. We know that workers are directed exactly what tasks to complete during their shift by an app on their phone. And if they take too long to complete a task, they can get called in for discipline. Maybe they get asked, by a public service user a question, or by a colleague to help out with another job. But if they take too long to complete that task, they can get disciplined. So AI can eliminate jobs, but I think it can also deteriorate the quality of jobs. It can remove autonomy from workers. It can increase employer surveillance and control in the workplace. And it can subject workers to really opaque, not transparent algorithms that affect their work lives in very real ways. So of course, this affects the dignity and human rights of workers. And then if we look at public services, technology can make public services better. It can also make public services worse. It really depends on what you're trying to do with the technology, right? Do workers and the public actually have a voice in what technology is being implemented in the public sector? A lot of the current wave of generative AI tools, their explicit purpose is to automate workers' jobs. And if we look at, say, a member of the public who calls, the government for information about something, gets stuck with a chatbot that does not deliver, that is not improved public service. So I think we have to really look at the risks and what we're trying to do with technology in the public sector. But we also know that these systems can have bias and discrimination baked into them. We know around the world that in the public sector, these automated algorithmic systems have been put in place that are discriminatory, that have flagged folks from equity-deserving communities for child protection investigations or fraud investigations. These tools were later pulled, but what's the damage? What's the damage to the individuals who are flagged by these tools? And what's the damage to the public sector? And what's the damage to our belief that technology can serve like a positive role in our society, right? So we are looking for employers to take the high road, to work with workers and public service users to implement tech that helps workers do their jobs well, that improves public service delivery. But I am concerned because AI and an austerity agenda don't work well for public service delivery, and they don't work well for jobs. And we are in a context where a lot of our public sector leaders are looking to implement technology in that kind of way. So how do we build public trust in technology? We regulate it. We actually stand up to big tech down south and to the Trump administration, and we say, we need protections to make sure that this technology does not harm people. It does not harm workers, it does not harm the public, and we need wide-ranging, comprehensive legislation, including in the workplace. There is a real imbalance in terms of power and control in workplaces between employers and workers. And employers can implement technology in ways that really harm workers. It harms their physical health, their psychological health and safety, and all of that kind of thing. So nothing about this is inevitable, just to put out some hope there, right? We have choices, our employers have choices, public sector leaders have choices, and we can actually take the high road, and we can implement technology that benefits society and workers.
Thank you for that. And speaking of LLMs, so I'm also the editor of Perspectives Journal, a Canadian journal of political economy and social democracy. You can find your copies over at the Broadbent booth at the end of the hall over there. But when I receive submissions for the journal, I kind of run into the editing problem of realizing, oh, this is probably written by an LLM. And when I also talk to a lot of my teacher friends, they're all public school teachers, and they tell me, like, look, you're only doing this for like a journal. Like, I got to do this every day with my students, trying to dissect like what's been written by an LLM or what's actual thought by a student. So I'd like to take this to Mia. What is AI doing to the education sector, and how does this undermine democracy?
Yeah, thanks so much, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. I think it's really great to be able to bring the K-12 public education sector to conversations like this, because I think sometimes we're sort of on the periphery a bit of discussions about the impacts of AI on society. And so, yeah, I guess first of all, just to say, I mean, in case there was any doubt, the use of AI, Gen AI in particular, in K-12 is widespread. Everyone's using it, students, teachers, in the classroom, outside of the classroom. And I think, what we're seeing is this really strong climate of techno-solutionism in the public education system. I think AI is being presented, particularly by big tech, as this magic fix to all of the challenges that have been facing the public education system, a way to fix any cracks, like a teacher shortage, like teacher working conditions, complex classrooms. They're really using this as an opportunity to try to push these products that are built on AI into classrooms. And I think, an example that I'll point out is that many of us have probably heard about is this promise of personalized learning for every child and AI tutors for every child, not just in Canada, but globally. As though teachers don't do that already every day. And I think it's important to think about that example in particular because, these are tools that are really sort of built on generative AI, and we already know that there are lots of harms of these types of chatbots, AI companions, particularly for young people. And now these are being presented as a tool that can be really useful across public education systems. So I think what this is doing is really undermining teacher professionalism, teacher autonomy, our values of human-centered learning and the importance of human-centered, the benefits of human-centered learning for students and I guess, for society more broadly. I read an article about Bill Gates saying teachers will be obsolete in 10 years. If any of you haven't read about Alpha Schools in the US, this private school system that is essentially running on AI. There are no teachers. It's this sort of capitalist project of efficiency-based education for really young students. They get financial rewards. It's all very, very weird and very concerning. So these are the things that we have to be aware of that could be coming down the pipeline if we're not careful, which brings me to the lack of regulation, I think, is really important to recognize as being an enabler of this really sort of flourishing ed tech market. And the fact that there are really little to no, from my understanding, actual positive impacts on students that have been shown, with regards to the use of these systems. So I think that's, worth paying attention to as well, is that we don't actually know whether this benefits learning, and tech companies don't seem to have any kind of responsibility to show that they do have any benefit to learning. It's really just all about profit. So I think just, one thing that that we're also trying to be mindful of is how this is sort of gradually reshaping the nature of digital divides and how we understand them in the K-12 education system. I think, historically this has been about access to technology and connectivity, which I'm not saying is not an issue that we need to keep in mind, but I think there's also this risk that it becomes a privilege to opt out of a digitalized education. I heard an interview with the head of policy at Anthropic the other day, and he was talking about how, like other big tech executives, he shields his children from technology, and I think that, should tell us a lot about the place of these in our kids' education. Thanks. And I guess just a couple more things finally, about in terms of, how this is undermining our democracy. I think this is really becoming a sort of accelerated climate of disaster capitalism. I think big tech is really drawing on these narratives of a fragmented public education or a broken public education system and using this to sell their products. And I think, this is increasing privatization in our public institutions, not just education. And there are few opportunities for democratic participation over if and when and how AI should be used in K-12. So I think we really need to flip this narrative that I think is being driven by big tech of what the future of public education should be. Because this is starting to filter down into the public education system at all levels. I'm sure many of us have heard this now, but this this expectation that we need to balance innovation, i.e. profit, with our human rights. And I think this is really something that's happening in the K-12 sector that we need to be mindful of. The rights of young people and their educators are prioritized over, the profit motives of like an AI lesson planning company or something like that. And I think just finally, the risk is also about what we're seeing is this increasing economic imperative around the purpose of public education. That this is all about preparing kids to enter an economy that, we don't know what that's going to look like when they graduate. And, we're losing touch of the broader democratic values of public education, teaching civic engagement, civic awareness, critical thinking and creativity are really at risk here, I think, self-awareness and so on. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you. So I'm gonna keep it short because I can feel my karaoke voice fading from last night, but I'm gonna turn this into an open-ended question segment here. The question is, what needs to be done to take back control of these technologies? Laurent, I like your analogy here of your neighbor if they have controls to the switchboard in the basement. I myself rent a basement and my neighbors upstairs control the thermostat. I would like to somehow one day take back control of the thermostat, but what would you suggest be done to take back control of these technologies?
It's a very big question, so I'll maybe take a small slice of that. So, one piece is on infrastructure, frankly. We've mentioned that a lot of data, a lot of the pipes really are and what's in them are going through the U.S. and I think that's a piece where if we're serious about building infrastructure to mitigate that, then we should get started and really identify what are the supply chains, what is the expertise in Canada that exists to do that, and it's non-trivial, right? Because when we're talking about data centers and whether that's cloud services, which is reasonably simple and not that electricity intensive compared to AI compute data centers, which are a lot more so on both counts. The chips is part of that. All the electrical infrastructure is part of that. The racks is part of that. You can go on and on about this, and then the actual cloud infrastructure itself, like the digital side. Paris, you mentioned the triopoly on this, and one thing I've come to appreciate is that it's not like you can just, if you're not happy with your Google Cloud service, you can walk over to Amazon Cloud and it's easy. It's not. To say it's non-trivial is really an understatement. So when we have Canadian, sovereign cloud providers, which we do in this country, they're obviously smaller, for them to have a competitive value offering on, compared to the big hyperscalers that have been, siphoning tons and tons and tons and tons of data and sharpening their products and their offering over the last 10 years. And I think that's like a real thing here that we can't forget is that the products are good, right? And people in this room who use Microsoft Teams and Microsoft Word might beg to differ, and fair enough, so do I. But the cloud offerings are really good and competitive. So when we talk about, how do we build a Canadian cloud, it's like, it's going to take real investment. It's going to take the government saying, we're going to buy a lot off of you guys so that you can get through that learning curve and have something that's really competitive so that you can then actually compete abroad in the private sector where in countries and in the US market where buying from Google or Amazon or Microsoft is not a concern, you actually have a good product and people are buying it because it's a good product and not because they don't want to buy from those three. So I think there's it's a really big project, to be honest, and I don't think it's something that we're going to solve in a year or two. But, as people often remark, the best time to plant a tree is probably 20 years ago if you want to really enjoy a beautiful orchard or a shade tree or something. But, the best you can do sometimes if you haven't done that is go grab a shovel and get digging because it's not going to wait for you otherwise.
Actually, Paris, a response to that.
Yeah, I would say I basically agree, and I would just add to, I think especially the need to think long-term about what this project is going to be, right? It's not going to be okay, next year we're off of US tech and, we're in this Canadian tech utopia or whatever, we're considering it. But I think I would approach it through three lenses, right, is the way that I think about this. The first is obviously regulation. We have this problem with US tech companies right now, whether that's dependence on cloud services, whether that is our dependence on social media platforms and the way that they operate and the effects that they have on our society. And I think that we need to get much more aggressive with that regulation and recognize that, yes, there are going to be costs that come with regulating these companies, in the way that we saw with the Online News Act, where Facebook took news off of its platform. And, I'll come back to that in just a second, but to really think about the harms that come from our dependence on these technologies, but also the way that the technologies work, and to really just go after targeting those things, right? If we're going to continue to use them in the short to medium term, then they should at least better reflect the values that we have, and we should be ready to fight to ensure that the platforms and the services do reflect those values. Recognizing that that is going to be a fight at the end of the day because these companies are powerful and the US government has been clear, not just under Trump, but for quite a long time, that they are going to use their diplomatic leverage in order to ensure that countries are going to have a hard time reining in their companies, right? So there's that piece of it. Alongside of that needs to be the investment to build the alternatives, right? To make sure that there's something else to go to. And that's the problem with the Facebook, kind of example, right? It's okay, you're regulating Facebook. They are not responding to that regulation, so they're removing news. And you don't really have an alternative to say, you know what? If you Canadians are not happy with Facebook, you can try something else. You can do something else, right? And so that piece has traditionally not really been there. And so I think the government needs to get much more serious about funding these alternatives, making sure that they're there, making sure that there are actual options for people, because it's good to want to get off of US technologies, but if the alternatives aren't there, then there's nothing else for you to go to, right? So that is a really big piece of it as well, making sure the funding is there, making sure that there's an actual strategy to think about what that is going to look like. And obviously, we can talk about alternatives in so many different spaces, but I think, going back to what you were saying, I think one opportunity, at least to get this started if we're thinking about low-hanging fruit, is the government investing in the types of things that it needs, right? It's going to need cloud services. It's going to need digital services to offer some kind of alternate platform to, a Microsoft 365 that it's on right now. What are the things that the public institutions need that the government can invest in, whether it's building or procuring, and then that kind of creates a starting point for private sector companies to start to make those shifts as well, right? Because the public sector has already started making these moves. And then the last piece I would add is actually thinking about what we need, right? The technologies that we need, the technologies that are working for us. Certainly Silicon Valley, US tech companies have built out a model of technology over the past few decades that we have kind of followed along with. But is that model really the one that's working for us, or can we start to think about ways of creating and using digital technologies that are not in line with those models, but maybe provide more public benefit than what has been offered to us? And that's a whole bigger conversation.
Can I jump in on one point there? just to highlight something you said about the U.S. really treating this as a priority, like I just want to highlight, in December they published a national security strategy, and they identify 5 like key national interests, one of which is wide adoption of U.S. tech and standards. Like they see this as a existential like geopolitical issue for them. Like, and I think we should treat that with the same seriousness. If that we have a somewhat hostile superpower across the border, like we should take very, very seriously what they think is important to their own long-term ability to project power. The other piece in there that they talk about is, their embassies are going to be places where they are going to be advocating for their companies, right? Like, and using sole source contracts. And like, these are ways that the US thinks about how it projects power. And I think we should do them the courtesy of taking them quite seriously on that. So that was just a very tangible piece that links, directly to that.
Thank you. And to Mia, just to turn things over to the public sector side of things, you mentioned these education companies based off of AI. Is there a way, or do you think there's a way to turn AI and tech from a tool of corporate power over the economy into something for the public good?
Yes, I do. I'm optimistic. I think, there's a few things I thought of here. I think in terms of, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in public digital AI infrastructure, but it is something I've been trying to think about a little more in the context of K-12. And I think, the K-12 public education sector, if anything, provides a really strong rationale for why this is so important, why we need, a Canadian cloud, as I understand it. There is so much sensitive student data, educator data that is being extracted in schools every day from primarily US-based companies. And from my understanding, a lot of that is stored in the US and other places. So I think, there's a strong case for that infrastructure to make sure that we can protect that data and sort of the long-term potential for exploitation, I think, of that data. The other thing that, I was thinking about in last December, there was a conference of teachers' unions from all around the world in Brussels, where we talked about how to protect human-centered teaching and learning in the age of AI. And it was really fascinating. There was a number of great speakers, one of which was a government-funded institute called NOLI in the Netherlands. And what they're doing is they're sort of investing in partnerships between researchers, practitioners in the education sector, and local ed tech companies. So they're bringing these groups together to develop sort of homegrown education technology. And I think importantly, those partnerships are sort of, the impetus for those partnerships comes from issues that teachers bring to the table. So they're sort of a grassroots opportunity to really develop sort of local homegrown technology. So I think that's something that, could be a really strong approach here as well. And then finally, I mean, in terms of, regulation obviously is extremely important, but also, literacy, I think. Critical AI literacy is extremely important for educators and for students. I think we need to make sure that, how do we make sure that people, and particularly young people, have the knowledge, the skills, the opportunity to really be a part of defining the future of what these systems look like in Canada. So I think importantly right now, there are lots of great efforts around AI literacy, but a lot of them feel very economic focused. And I think we need to sort of think about what does it mean to have critical AI literacy, but for citizenship and for civic engagement, and to be able to participate in policymaking around emerging technology. And I think just finally, how do we make defining AI literacy more of a democratic project is also something that I'm thinking a lot about. Yeah.
I'll get to Sarah in a second, but I know Paris wants to jump in.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think what you're saying about getting people more involved in the discussions around the technologies that we use, how they're rolled out in society, how they're rolled out in workplaces, is so important, right? And it's very much not the way that it's often treated right now. It's like a tech company decides that this is the technology that we're going to use and how we should be using it, and then we just all need to kind of rearrange ourselves to fit what they need and what they want. And I think one of the things I would add on like AI in particular is that we're in this moment right now of like peak hype around AI, right? You know, the companies really want us all to adopt it. They want us to believe that it can be rolled out for like any particular purpose. And part of that discussion, I think, that's so necessary is recentering like where it can actually potentially be useful, if it can be useful in different spaces. Because right now it's like, certainly there's hype, there's a big push to adopt it. There's not a lot of evidence around how useful it actually is, though we're seeing more and more of that, and the results are not always the greatest, not always aligned with what we're hearing from the tech companies. But then the other piece of it is that right now the cost of using these systems is subsidized. You're not kind of accessing it at the actual cost of delivering these services. And so once the companies actually have to make the cost, reflect, or make the price reflect the cost of delivery, then I think we're actually going to see a big reassessment of where it actually makes sense to roll these things out, both in the public sector, in the private sector. There was a report in the Globe and Mail a few months ago that only 2% of Canadian businesses that have been investing in kind of AI systems, AI pilots, have been seeing a return on investment. So most of them are really not. So I think there's still a very open question about how useful these things are going to be. And of course, they always target the education sector for all of these new technologies to try to get it in there early.
And just to Sarah, we need to wrap up real soon, but for the public service, is there a way, a shout out also to the QP task force on AI, thinking about this issue, a way to leverage AI to make it something into the public good? How should we go about that?
Well, I think, there's been some conversation about public digital infrastructure, but I think when digital technology is in our public services, whether it's our municipal governments, our provincial governments, our federal governments, our hospitals, social service agencies, our educational institutions, we should have publicly owned technology. And I think we do, if we really put our minds to it, we could develop that capacity rather than having private sector tech that was developed very much from a profit point of view. But it's not enough just to talk about public ownership. I think we need to talk about who benefits from the technology? Why are we developing the technology? For what purpose? And who are we talking to about what needs to be developed, right? Are we talking to workers? Are we talking to public service users? Or is it being, top-down imposed in some kind of, it makes sense to somebody in a boardroom, right? But doesn't make sense in terms of how it's actually implemented on the ground. Because I have seen a lot of pretty gong show, off-the-shelf corporate tech implementation in the public sector that really deteriorates public services that, frankly, in some cases can put public service users at risk of harm and definitely doesn't make workers' jobs easier. I did as well, though, want to flag the environmental concerns around AI, generative AI, and data center growth. I think we can't ignore that in our conversations around AI and what it means as in order to be a public good, it can't destroy and trash all of our climate change goals, right? We need to be looking at this in a serious way. And right now, we can't even track the greenhouse gas emissions that are coming from AI and the data center growth. We don't even have the information to know where we're at right now. So, and like these hyperscale data centers are popping up in our community and like sucking up our municipal drinking water, right? What does that mean for communities? Like, drought risk communities. So I think there's a lot of questions about how we do this in a way. Technology should bring people along. It should benefit society. And we should be asking those questions and demanding that the way we implement tech, our vision for tech sovereignty in Canada, brings everyone along and benefits everybody.
Thank you for that. Just to wrap up here, I'd like 30-second responses, I think, from each of our guests here. What does a true nation-building program for AI and digital sovereignty look like in Canada? Starting with Paris.
I'd say throw aside the AI first, and then we think seriously about the technologies that we actually need to benefit our society, right? Let's have the government really think about the ways that we can develop digital technology and technology more broadly to serve the wider public, not just to follow along with what the major tech companies are developing and what they think is the thing that is going to attract investment and hype and excitement in the moment. You know, we need a broad conversation about what the future of our society is going to look like, the ways that technology can help us in that project, but ultimately it should be guided by a politics and a vision for what the future should be, rather than what technology people want to develop and then how we all kind of rearrange ourselves around it.
Thank you. So Laurent.
Yeah, I'll take just a slightly different angle, just because I think we all agree there's a strong role for, you know, public governance around the direction of technology. I guess like the piece I would say is thinking really hard about, you know, what creates economic growth in today's economy, which is intangible assets. That's data, that's IP. So having a modern industrial strategy that takes those things into account so that we can actually realize some of the gains from technology that are being created. Like Canada's government put, you know, millions and millions of dollars into AI research at at various research universities. That public investment has built people lots of nice houses in the San Francisco Bay Area. I think we should be thinking hard about how we could maybe direct some of that growth and wealth to Canada so that we can have, you know, sustainable public services and a stronger society in the long run.
Totally agree. To Sarah, yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to take it in a slightly different direction. Data. You know, I think data can seem really boring, but I think we need to be having conversations about the data extractive society that we live in and where we want to go. Do we want to be in a society where our data is constantly being extracted and monetized and used to sell us things or to surveil us, right? So I think a vision for where we want to go in terms of sovereignty, we should be thinking about our data.
And lastly, Mia, please.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I guess when I think about a nation-building program around AI, you know, just something that really is human-centered, human rights-driven, putting this before profit, and, you know, something that really does consider where public education stands in all of this and the threats to public education. You know, 90% or more of young people attend public schools in this country. There's over 400,000 educators in public elementary and secondary schools in this country. You know, this is a system, a core part of our democracy that the vast majority of us travel through at multiple points in our lives as students, as workers, as parents. And our taxes are going into this system and they're being funneled out into, you know, large US tech firms. And so I think, I guess when I think about a nation-building program, it really does need to think about how we protect public education, how we protect those democratic values of public education, so it can stay as this institution where we all come together, you know, we come together despite our differences, and where we ensure that people are developing the skills that they need in order to sort of be a part of deciding the future of what we want these technologies to sort of look like in our lives. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. That is unfortunately all the time we have for today. I know we could probably make this a 2-hour whole day convention, but please, another round of applause for our tech experts here. And up next, we have a very special guest from New York City, so stay tuned.
Thank you to that very insightful and interesting panel about one of the critical issues that's facing our society today. I'm really excited about this next guest. If the last few years have taught us anything, it's that politics can change really fast. Faster than the pundits expect, and faster than the establishment often feels comfortable with. When Zohran Mamdani won his mayoral race in New York City, it wasn't just a local upset. It was a global event and a reminder that when you speak to people on the ground in their language about what they care about and not about what you think they should care about, you can win, even in one of the biggest, most complex cities in the world. But that victory didn't come out of nowhere. It came from years of patient and disciplined organizing, from volunteers knocking on doors in every borough, from small dollar donors chipping in what they could, from coalitions that refused to be siloed from one another, from people who believed that social democratic policies rooted in the lives of real people could actually govern. And at the heart of that ecosystem is the New York City Democratic Socialists of America, the largest chapter of the DSA with more than 14,000 members. Our final keynote speaker helped lead that work. As co-chair of NYC DSA, Grace Mauser has worked on dozens of Democratic Socialist campaigns across New York, building powerful canvassing operations, forging broad left coalitions, and raising millions from grassroots donors. She's been in leadership since 2020 and stepped into the role of co-chair in October of 2024, helping steer one of the most dynamic local socialist organizations in North America at a moment when the stakes could not be higher. Joining Grace to unpack the strategies and tools driving progressive municipal agendas is Carla Weber-Gallagher, Chief of Staff to Toronto Mayor Olivia Chow. All week, I've been looking forward to moderating this final fireside chat because this isn't just about winning one race for mayor. It's about proving what is possible when you organize at scale, when you trust ordinary people to lead, and when you build something durable enough to outlast a single election. So first, I'd like to invite Grace up to speak about the historic win that she helped to create. So please, can you give Grace a round of applause?
Hi, everyone. It's so nice to be here, and thank you for that kind introduction. Like he said, my name is Grace Mauser. I'm one of the co-chairs of New York City DSA. So I thought I'd start with a bit of a DSA 101. As many of you may know, the Democratic Socialists of America are a big tent organization working towards democratic socialism in the US. And by this, it's a long road. So by this I mean we're fighting for a democratic path to a society where people have a real democratic say in their political and economic futures. Our members pay dues. This is almost how the entirety of DSA is funded. We don't have big grants or large donors, and we're almost entirely volunteer run. I myself am a volunteer. We have about 23 staff at the national level and only 2 in New York City DSA, and this is for more than 100,000 members nationally and over 14,000 in New York City. Now, one thing that's important to understand about DSA in the US is that we are not a political party, technically. As you may know, parties in the US are not true political parties. Neither the Democrats nor the Republicans really organize their members or their elected officials. But due to US election law, they also cannot really control their ballot lines. So DSA is attempting to make a party without a ballot line. For the most part, in most places, we don't seek the ballot line for several reasons. One, because the parties can't control their ballot line due to our primary system. 2, because the primacy of the 2 parties in the US make it almost impossible when you include factors like gerrymandering and how the presidential election works. It makes it really impossible to win as a third party, and in many places, one of the 2 parties is basically cakewalking through the general election anyway. And then 3, maintaining a ballot line is legally onerous. So instead, we're trying to do what Democrats and Republicans are not. We organize first our members, which we do locally. Again, they're critical to our funding, but they also very actively choose our priorities and what campaigns we run. And then we organize our elected officials through what we usually call socialist in office committees. Unlike many American political organizations, we don't just elect someone and then say, good luck, hope you don't disappoint us. Instead, we actively meet and organize them and allow them to organize us in return. In New York, we have 9 state legislators and 4 city council members, and we meet with each of these groups every single week for about an hour and a half each. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of time, but this is critical because our aim is not only to win elections, but to actually wield power. So this brings me to how we got to 2025. Zoran did not come from nowhere. There was a lot of work that happened in the preceding decade in DSA to make it possible. So we've run electoral races since 2017. Of course, in 2016, with the surprising success of Bernie and the harrowing victory of Trump, a lot of American leftists woke up and tried to get more serious. In New York City, that resulted in 2 races, city council races, that we ran in 2017, one of which Zoran Mamdani was a field lead on. We lost both of these races, but we learned a lot. And we learned that we actually had the ability not only to canvass, but to run strategy, and in many cases do it a hell of a lot better than the so-called political class. So we kept going. In 2018, of course, AOC won. DSA was not in the driver's seat for that race, but we did learn a lot. And we also learned that we could kind of ride the wave of a political moment. And later that year, our first true top-to-bottom DSA campaign was successful with Julia Salazar, who is now a state senator in the New York State Legislature. Every year since then, we've run a race. Some of them we've won, many of them we've lost. We've never lost any territory, though, so our incumbents are all still in place. But we've always learned, and through these years, we've created the organizers that made the Zoran campaign possible. And critically, Zoran was there and helped shape both our socialist in office strategy and our campaign strategy. And he brought that with him into his 2025 race. So now I'm going to take you inside the Zoran strategy a bit, which I separate into 3 main points. The first thing is the message. The message is what really made the campaign take off. A lot of press wanted to focus on slick videos or a social media strategy, but without a resonant message, these things would not have stuck at all. He was laser focused on affordability. He had 3 main platforms that everyone knew by heart at the end: freezing the rent, fast and free buses, and free universal childcare. And these are things that materially impacted New Yorkers' lives. On top of that, all of his messaging was very New York focused, but he didn't back down from controversy, particularly when it came to things that may be less relevant to city government, but were important morally, like the genocide in Palestine. This drew in hundreds of volunteers into his race because he was unafraid to stand by these principles, even when he was pressured by the right to let them go. Second, an investment in comms. Zoran's comms were able to take off because his message was resonant, but he also invested very early in a comms team. He put a lot of resources into non-traditional media, in part because traditional media was ignoring us for a long time. But this also allowed Zoran to shine as a charismatic and young politician. So this early investment clearly really paid off, and it reached people where they were, often on their phones, not watching traditional cable news or reading print papers. And then finally, and the closest to my heart, is his focus on field. The most staff resources, the most money in the campaign was for the field program. This was critical in enabling people who were inspired by the message, by the comms, to actually go do something. We had 100,000 people signed up to volunteer, and together we knocked well over 2 million doors and made 3.5 million phone calls. These volunteers were the pool that DSA was able to organize from. Since October 2024, when he launched his campaign, New York City DSA has grown by about 140%, and most of these people were Zoran volunteers. Now, a little bit about the context of the race. Getting DSA on board, we did that early, but Zoran started talking about it in early 2024. Perhaps he was inspired by another left-wing immigrant mayor in the country's largest city, slightly to our north. And through that inspiration, he began to go through our fairly intensive democratic endorsement process. But because of DSA's endorsement and because of all the work we had done in the preceding decade, even though he was polling at 1%, his field launch in December of 2024 had 500 people there, which I think was bigger than any other candidate managed at any point in the race, and this was in December before the primary. However, DSA was not enough alone. It was very important that we pulled in other groups. I'll name a few, like Dazi's Rising Up and Moving, CAV, who organizes working class Asian communities in the city, and the Muslim Democrats. All these groups enabled us to reach parts of the city and activate voters in the type of the electorate who had been ignored for decades, particularly a Muslim voter. Zoran came into this race with the theory that the Muslim electorate was undertapped and underutilized, and he was extremely right. We saw not only him succeeding in progressive areas, where it was sort of expected, but also into further parts of the outer boroughs, where usually more conservative candidates win. And this was because he was able to activate, organize, and maintain ties with Muslim and immigrant communities in those boroughs. I need to start to wrap up here, but I want to talk a little bit about what is next. Now that we are in a position of power that we've never been in before, a year and a half ago I was not giving keynote speeches anywhere, but we're in a position that we're trying to utilize to create and lead a left-labor coalition in the United States. We're not stopping our electoral work, we're building 2026 races. In fact, in New York, we have our largest slate of candidates ever. And of course, we're very focused on actually winning the affordability agenda. This means that we're putting a lot of resources into legislative campaigns. We're running our biggest ever legislative campaign in New York right now to tax the rich. We got a very exciting update yesterday. Both houses of the legislature included our bills in their budget. So now we just got to get the governor on board. We're also creating structures for mass governance. So what does it mean for people to actually engage in New York City government? Joining their community boards, getting on their PTAs, what does it mean to have them have a real say in institutions that are in many ways perfunctory, but how do we make them powerful when we bring socialists into them? And then finally, and I'm excited to talk to Carla about this, we need to govern and govern well. We have a lot to learn from cities like Toronto about how to navigate a hostile state/provincial government. We have a lot to learn about the challenges of actual implementation, moving from outside agitators to people with real power. We cannot be afraid of that challenge, and I'm really excited to figure it out with all of you. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for that primer, that taster. I'm really excited to get into this conversation. Okay, so first off, right off the hop, I have to ask the question that I think everybody here wants to know. How many of those black suits does Zoran have? Like, I'm imagining he has just like an entire wardrobe full of them and then like one New York Knicks jersey or something?
So I actually did find this out. And look, New York's expensive, so he actually only has 3, which I thought was kind of crazy. But you got to save money for childcare and transit.
Yes. Yeah, so on that note, I think we're all really excited about this conversation because, frankly, times are dark and we could all use some hope right? Something to hang our hats on and something to help us get out of bed and keep organizing in the morning. So I'd love to start by just talking about some of the tangible, real wins for working people that we've achieved and that we're striving to achieve on the things that matter most. So Carla, I want to start with you and affordability, which is obviously top of mind no matter where you live. What has Olivia's focus been on when it comes to affordability? Like, if I'm gonna go home and talk to my aunties in Scarborough about how Olivia's made their life more affordable, what should I tell them?
Thanks, Jared, and thanks everyone. It's great to see so many friendly faces in the room and to reconnect with folks over the last couple days. Thanks for the question. It's such an important one, and I think I could talk about it for a very long time, so I'll narrow it down to a couple of examples. And not just because I like to talk about this, but also because the mayor has done a tremendous amount on affordability in the City of Toronto and making real gains for working people. So for 13 years at least prior to the mayor being elected, working people didn't see their priorities reflected at City Hall. And so the mayor coming in needed to immediately show working people, people who live in the City of Toronto, an incredibly diverse city of 3 million people, that the decisions and actions of City Hall were going to reflect their priorities, what they needed to see from this mayor. And chief among those concerns right now is affordability. We see it in every public domain poll that comes out. We hear it from people in our office every day. When the mayor's out in the world, we hear it from regular people on the street. This is the biggest concern that they have. And so I'll give you 2 examples we've made big gains with this year, and I think myself and our team and the mayor are very proud of. This year, in September, Toronto's school food program will become universal. So this means 330,000 kids across the City of Toronto will get a nutritious meal in school every day. And so this doesn't just create an affordability buffer for folks, it does. It saves families $900 a year on groceries, one of the biggest cost of living drivers that we're seeing. But it also is a social program that resolves an underlying problem, which is that we're seeing more and more food bank use, and particularly, we're seeing the numbers of children who are accessing food banks in Toronto and across the country spike, right? An unacceptable reality that with this program, the mayor is starting to tackle a piece of that. So we're really proud of that piece that is coming to its full universality in September. And then the second thing I'll talk about quickly is TTC fares. So for 13 years, working people saw TTC service decline and fares increase year over year, right? And which shows just the priorities of previous mayors when it comes to working people. They weren't important. They didn't prioritize fast, reliable, safe transit for workers. They cut the service, they raised the fares. So for the 3rd year running in this budget, the mayor has frozen TTC fares. We've not seen an increase. We've also made record investments in improving service. So the subway comes every 2.5 minutes now instead of every 3.5. We're doing signal priority. We've got bus routes and streetcar routes that have more vehicles, more operators that are coming more frequently and moving people faster across the city, making major investments in that transit. And so not only is it reflecting a priority for people who need to move around the city efficiently and easily, it's also saving your average family that takes a TTC $300 a year. So these 2 programs combined, we're saving families in this year's budget $1,200 a year, which is huge if you think about the federal tax cut that Mark Carney introduced in his latest budget, which has an upside value to a dual income household of $840. And we're doing it while addressing some of the biggest challenges that working people in our city face. So I'll just close by saying it's not because Toronto suddenly got rich, like there was a big influx of money and we've just had extra to spend. It's about choices, right? It's about who the mayor serves at City Hall, who she cares about and who she prioritizes, and that's how we were able to deliver this for working people and much, much more in the next mandate, I'm sure.
Grace, this question comes to you via my best friend who is a New Yorker and my sisters who live in the Bronx. So from them and from pretty much every New Yorker I've heard, childcare is one of the biggest costs, like at $3,000 per month per kid. Yeah, exactly. Can you tell us a bit about the childcare situation in New York right now? You know, what previous administrations have done and what Zoran's going to do to help address that?
Yeah, so the biggest challenge is obviously cost and needing state money from that. The city, I believe much like Toronto, New York City is very limited in its ability to raise revenue. And we are also mandated after the 1970s financial crisis to have a balanced budget. So we are fighting a campaign to tax the rich. That's the legislative campaign I referenced earlier. And Zoran is part of that fight. I think his ability to be connected and utilize outside forces to change the conditions in which he is governing is going to be critical for this. Now, we've already secured some wins on childcare. The governor has given us, the city, some funds to begin the rollout of what we call 2K, or childcare for 2-year-olds. New York City already has 3K, pre-K, and of course, universal kindergarten. And one thing that we have been really fighting for as socialists, sometimes being in conflict with our progressive or more moderate allies who also want childcare, is holding the line on it being universal and not becoming a means-tested program. Even though that may, in the short term, enable us to get to the families who have the highest needs, we see that in the medium and long term, it also allows programs to be defunded. And we really don't want that. We want childcare to become like public school. So it'll take a little bit. It'll take a little bit. The rollout is just starting. And of course, he's only been in office about 2 months. So I don't think we'll see the full vision of 2K or even expanding downward until towards the end of his first term and through the middle of his second term. But I think we're seeing the beginning of really positive development. And once you roll out a universal benefit, it's very hard to take it back. So we're really relying on that.
All right, awesome. I will report back. So Carla, you talked about the school food program. You talked about making sure that the TTC works for people in Toronto and that they can save on these two of their largest costs. Obviously, we just talked about childcare, and a thread that kind of runs through these things that you've touched on, Grace, is fairness. So as the ED of Canadians for Tax Fairness, I'd kind of be remiss if I didn't dig into how we can ensure that the wealthiest among us contribute their fair share to running and improving the world-class cities that allowed them to build their wealth in the first place. So that's what I'd love to talk about. But I know, obviously, that municipal governments have a pretty limited set of tools when it comes to, collecting revenue. Carla, how has Olivia navigated that challenge?
Well, Jared, I had to really cut down my notes because I had a big analysis here to start with, just for you. But what I will say, just to start off, is that the problem is real when it comes to municipal revenue tools and the flexibility that municipalities have. And I'll give you kind of a fun example that our CFO uses in a lot of his budget reports, which is, does everybody remember the Taylor Swift Eras tour? Yeah, fondly, I hope. When that tour came to Toronto, it cost the City of Toronto millions of dollars to make sure that it was a success. From safety, transit, all of the funding that had to go into that to make it a success, the city footed the bill for that. The concerts generated $282 million in economic benefit for the region, and $40 million of that was tax revenue. And the City of Toronto got $350,000. I know. So there is a real problem when it comes to the tools that municipalities have and how we can find ways to make them flexible enough to achieve what Jared's talking about. And so again, right, this is about choices. Who in our city should pay more? Is it the renter who can't afford to make their rent? Is it the PSW who's taking the bus home after working a double shift? Absolutely not, right? And with this mayor, the choice is very clear. It's the wealthiest amongst amongst us, the ones who, to your point, Jared, have benefited the most from the city. And we've done that in a couple ways, and the mayor's taken some real leadership positions on these. So we increased the vacant homes tax. So for speculators who are holding investment homes vacant in a housing crisis, the tax that they pay is now prohibitive. And we've seen a huge decline in the number of homes that are remaining vacant, and that program has worked incredibly well. And the wealthiest home buyers in the city now pay much more in land transfer tax. Sounds very boring, but it's generated $250 million of revenue for the city, because those are the folks who should be paying more to make life more affordable for regular families. And so it's never been about if the city could afford to take care of working people. It's, do you have the political will to ask the right people to do it? And with Mayor Olivia Chow, that's been a no-brainer. We've made some good progress.
Right on. I just want to ask one geek out follow-up on that. Sorry. But when we talk about the land transfer tax, what valuation are we talking about? Because I'm definitely going to get this one when I go back to Scarberia. Like, it's like, oh, is it my house that's like that we worked 3 generations to get, and it's like that house is now worth like maybe $900,000, $1 million. If I decide to sell it, or if I decide to buy a house like that, is that gonna ding me?
No way. We're talking about people who buy houses that are $3 million or more.
All right. Auntie June, that is for you. Okay, so similar question for you, Grace. How do you see this challenge unfolding for Zoran and the DSA in New York, and what are some of the tools that you guys are thinking about?
Yeah, we have a very similar set of challenges here, where the city has an extremely limited toolbox to raise revenue. So we have to partner with a semi-hostile state government, an extremely hostile federal government, although Trump seems to like Zoran for now, to get the funding for these programs. And the tools that are available to the city are very broken. So I'm not super familiar with the Canadian tax tools, but I don't think we have anything like a land value tax at our disposal. What we have that the city can do is a property tax, which is an extremely inequitable system that the city is actually not able to fix without the state signing off on it. So if we raise property taxes, the people who get dinged the most are middle-class homeowners who live in the outer boroughs, while the people who live in wider post-gentrified neighborhoods who have homes that are worth several $1 million, their taxes don't go up that much because there's a property tax cap. And actually, the people who pay the most property taxes are renters, but they don't know it because it's all hidden in their rent. So it's an extremely broken system, and it's the only revenue tool the city has at its disposal. So right now we're in a situation where Zoran has proposed raising property taxes. He does not want to, but it's also a bit of a bargaining tool for him and also for the outside movement that is trying to increase taxes on the wealthy. And critically, 2 of our bills that we're putting up to the state level say, hey, let the city tax itself. Give the city the power to increase income taxes, to increase corporate taxes. And then, if all the millionaires leave and the city becomes an apocalypse zone, you can blame us. The state doesn't have to do it, but give us back that power that you took away in the 70s. So we're trying to get some of that, some of those levers of power back.
Okay, awesome. I think probably as long as you continue to have that many Michelin star restaurants in New York, I don't think any of the millionaires are leaving.
They're not going anywhere.
But anyway, I digress. I feel like the flow of this conversation kind of brings us to a really important needle to thread now more than ever in 2026. So You win power in New York City. Congratulations. Donald Trump is the president. Kathy Hochul is the governor. Congrats, you're mayor of Toronto. Doug Ford is the premier. President's choice Mitt Romney is the prime minister. Right? So my question to you, both of you, is like, how do you work with people who don't share our values to get good things done for people in our city without compromising those values? So AV, can you pop up the first picture, please? All right, Grace, I'm going to start with you. And of course, the Trump whispering Riz God, Zoran Mamdani. Can you talk to us about DSA and the mayor's approach to navigating this particular minefield?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any of us knew that Trump would have such a crush on Zoran. Maybe we should have. He loves a handsome winner, so perhaps that's the key we hit upon here. But Zoran is being intentional about this strategy and critically has also kept his partners updated, right? He wants to protect the city from potential ice surges. He also, the photo that's up there now, if we want to build the amount of affordable housing that we need, we have to have federal funding. The state just doesn't even have that level of funding that we're talking about. This photo was a meeting in regards to building a new co-op city, basically. So there's a huge development in the Bronx with thousands of affordable units, the scale of which has really never been attempted again since it was built in the mid-20th century. And the Sunnyside Yards development that this photo was about would build 12,000 units by bridging over a rail yard. This kind of thing is definitely possible, but only if the federal government invests in it. So, you play the hand you're dealt. Trump is a New York real estate developer, so maybe he's interested in New York real estate opportunities. This is what we played to. In regards to the state, and even at the federal level, I keep coming back to what is important is that we didn't just elect someone and say, good luck. It is our job as people around Zoran, some people have gone into the administration, many are staying outside. It is our job to change the conditions that enable him to do the promises that he committed to. He can't just snap his fingers. And we can't grow complacent. I think it's very comfortable for the left to settle into protesting someone who we see as having failed what they've promised to do, and sometimes they deserve it. But we have to try and organize and strategize as hard as we can to change the conditions so that what they have promised becomes more possible. And then it's a collective win. It doesn't belong to one person.
Hear, hear. So, Carla, I am old enough to remember when Doug Ford said Olivia Chow would be an unmitigated disaster for Toronto. AV friends, can you pop up the next picture? Fast forward to today, and Olivia has clearly found a way to make this work. So can you walk us through her approach? How's it gone? And what wins for everyday Torontonians have come out of her figuring out how to handle Doug Ford?
Yeah, thanks. You stole my first line of my answer, which was to read that quote from the 2023 by-election, where the mayor and the premier were not quite as able to work together. And 18 months later, this picture was taken, and the context of this picture is the signing of a historic New Deal for Toronto, which delivered $4 billion worth of funding to the city. And big ups to my predecessor, Michael Hay here, who was the architect of that incredible deal. And I think the approach, similar to what's happening in New York, right, was to play the hand you're dealt, but also tenaciously go after what working people needed from other levels of government that have to provide that funding to make it possible. Nothing was going to stop the mayor from having a seat at the table for workers so that she could deliver what they needed, and being clear-eyed about the priorities of other governments and how her priorities could align, where she could find the alignment that she needed to move things forward. And so not only did she deliver the New Deal, in the fall of 2025, or maybe it was the spring, anyway, in 2025, the federal, provincial, and municipal government delivered another $2 billion deal with $7 billion worth of financing available from the federal government for building housing. So these are like big accomplishments that the mayor has managed to get because she will work with anyone and everyone to get things across the finish line for the people of Toronto, and that has been her approach. It has been unrelenting, and it has actually delivered real results for people and put us in a position where we're going back to get more and more and more and more. And so you'll see some cool stuff coming up in the spring on that note, but it's anyone and everyone will get it done.
Right on. Also, marking that teaser on my calendar for the spring. Grace, I've got something that I have wanted to talk to you about that I'm super excited about. So something that Zoran said in his incredible inaugural speech. Avery, friends, can you pull this clip up?
And throughout it all, we will, in the words of Jason Terrence Phillips, better known as Jadakiss or Jay to the moi, be outside. Because this is a government of New York, by New York, and for New York.
All right, so as a speechwriter, as a New Yorker, as an elder millennial hip-hop head, that was like such a bar to me. Some of the folks in here are confused, and that's okay, because we're gonna explain what that means. So Grace, can you talk to us about what Zoran and Jadakiss mean when they say that we've gotta be outside, and like, how is that a movement building strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it means we have to be everywhere, be visible, be with the people. And from Zoran's vantage point, I think it really means two things. One, it means that he himself and his government need to be in the streets, need to be meeting New Yorkers where they're at. This means doing things like I believe the first or second week, or actually, I'm sorry, it was before he took office in the transition period. He did a day-long set of meetings, basically, where New Yorkers, any New Yorker who applied, could get 10 minutes with the mayor, or the future mayor at that point. And he did that for 8 hours, basically. And that kind of thing is, yes, part stunt, but it really did inform his perspective and what he values and wants to bring into the mayoralty. It means that he's going to continue to be out on the streets, meeting people where they're at, doing things like something that happened last week, the rental ripoff hearings. So he's using the resources of the mayor's office to host large-scale meetings with thousands of people in every borough where tenants can come and talk directly to city commissioners about the problems they are having as tenants in their buildings. This won't always lead, not every complaint and problem is going to lead to a solution the next day, but in the medium and long term, it will change the perspective of the bureaucracy that Zoran is now at the head of. The other thing it means is, of course, the outside movement is part of governing now, is part of his strategy. I referenced that we had 100,000 volunteers in the Zoran campaign. These people are still mobilized, and this is a very impressive number, but the number I'm actually proudest of is that we had 500 canvassing leads in that campaign. So these are people who are not just knocking doors, but are trained to teach others to knock doors, who know their communities deeply, who know their neighbors, who know how to talk not only directly to voters and to constituents, but how to create new people who feel comfortable talking to their neighbors and constituents about issues. So when we say, we're gonna be outside, it means all of these things. It means that we need to be ever present, pounding the drum that people are in power, that we are able to strategize and organize to demand and win what we deserve. And we can only do that if we're literally saying it all the time until we're tired of saying it. But plenty of people haven't heard it yet, and even more don't believe it. So that's what that means to me.
Right on, thank you so much. Hopefully that explained this very esoteric clip that I've chosen. Okay, Carla, I cannot think of a Canadian elected official in my lifetime who is more outside than Olivia. Like every week, my mom hits me up on WhatsApp with like a picture of her on CP24 and she said, there you Mayor again, you know, does she sleep? So, does she?
No.
For folks who don't know Olivia, like, is this just a personality trait or is this part of how she sees her role as mayor?
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying I have never seen a schedule like the one the mayor keeps, and I have to employ several people to be with her at all times because no one other person on this earth that I have met could keep up with Mayor Olivia Chow. She is always out all the time, meeting with communities and seeing and getting to people where they're at. And I think the real fundamental thing about this for the mayor is that she loves it, right? This is what recharges her battery. Like when she is out in the community talking to people directly, hearing from them about what they need from City Hall, that is what makes her come back with the excitement and commitment to getting, like fixing those problems that people have brought to her in that way. And it's not just about photo ops, right? It's not about being seen to be in those places. It's about who has access to City Hall. Is it the people who traditionally have known how to get access to City Hall, who come in their suits and sit around the board table and ask for what they want, what their priorities are? Or is it meeting people where they're at and finding out what problems they're facing and thinking through how we can address them? And so I'll just use a quick example here, which is one that I like a lot just in terms of how quickly the mayor kind of moves. And it's a trait that she has where like she gets things done fast. When she comes back every day after those big long schedules and says, okay, here's what I heard. We got to do this, 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 and this. And so there was a neighborhood in Toronto that had some pretty serious flooding a few years ago. And there was a power outage and people's basements flooded. And you know, this mayor doesn't stand up and do a press conference from behind a podium or release a press release saying that's really too bad, I'm sorry you're going through that. She called up the local councillor, they got in the car, they went and knocked doors in that neighborhood. And they found out, while they were talking to people, that because the city subsidy for sump pumps and flood mitigation doesn't cover generators, that when the power went out, all of their sump pumps stopped working. And so within a couple weeks, we had changed the whole structure of that program, doubled the subsidy amount for people to install that kind of flood mitigation, included generators in the package. We rolled out free consultations across the city in 14 languages, so everybody would have access to this program. And we just really figured out, like, this is the problem. She heard it directly from the people who had dealt with it most recently, and she fixed it. And so that's who she's taking her cues from, right? She's out in community, she's talking to real people, and that's partly why she does that, right? It's about who has access and who sees their priorities reflected in the decisions that she's making at City Hall.
Okay, so being mindful of time, I think we've got time for like 2 more sets of questions. So I'm gonna go to you on this one, Grace. Back in November, you wrote something in Convergence Mag that I thought was such a great window into one of the central tensions we're dealing with on the left. You've spoken to it a little bit, both in your speech and kind of here. So I want to kind of get your take on this. You said of the left in the US, and I'm going to quote you here, through the later part of the 20th century into the 2010s, the left embraced a protest model. We were outsiders only, and our job was to apply pressure on the decision makers. This model resulted in some success, but rarely has it resulted in sustained power. We all know remaining outsiders to policymaking power is insufficient to achieving any socialist goal within our lifetimes. So Grace, those days are gone now. The DSA has attained some policy-making power. You've got the mayor. I believe you've got a voting bloc of 4 city councilors as well. How do you navigate that tension you mentioned between pushing from the outside and working with your elected officials who are now inside?
It's very hard. We are in the middle of a mindset shift. So, you know, I wrote that, and I wish every member was like, all right, we're on board. But it's hard to adapt your tactics. It's hard to change strategies. It's hard to figure out what compromises are compromises of your core values and what compromises will lead to greater power in the long term. And sometimes we get it wrong. We will get it wrong. Zoran will get it wrong. We'll all get it wrong at some point. So a lot of it is acclimating to the new positionality of DSA, not only in New York City, but also nationally. We also, especially with the mayor, have to build collaboration structures. So I referenced our socialist in office committees. We have these standing structures. A lot of it is codified, who from the org is doing what, who's there from each of the legislative offices. That's been stood up over the course of several years. It's been an iterative process, and it's still pretty young, although I do think it's probably the most developed co-governance model in the US in many ways. There's none of that structure for mayoral power. New York City has an extremely strong executive. He is in charge of close to 1,000 people who work directly for City Hall. And then if you expand that to appointments across departments, commissions, and boards, he's appointing thousands of people. We can't have that many people on a weekly meeting. So we have to figure out new ways to collaborate across our priority areas. Who are we meeting with? Who are we not meeting with? We maybe don't need a direct line to the Department of Corrections for now. But we do need a direct line to the Department of Housing, Preservation, and Development. How are we building those? Is it one weekly meeting? Is it several? Who's in what? A lot of this is still pretty chaotic right now, but we know that the mayor's office at the highest level, from the mayor himself, is interested in building these bridges. We obviously are interested in building these bridges. There's already been some stumbles and growing pains, but I felt good about the things that we have disagreed on so far. It's only 2 months in, but they have led to generative fixes. So it's been a challenge. It's been probably the most stressed I've ever been, but I see long-term potential here, and I know it's going to take more than 2 months to figure it out. So I maintain optimism. Yeah.
Okay. Carla, sort of similar question, but obviously from the opposite side of things, right? As you are very much inside. How important is it to maintain that balance, keep the lines of communication open with the parts of the movement that are outside, but vital to the coalition?
Well, I mean, critically, the mayor is an organizer. She's got 40 years of organizing chops. So when she took office, it was really important to her to keep that culture of organizing very much alive. And you see that in like her being out in the community, but also just having the structures and systems in place to recruit volunteers, to be canvassing all the time, to be, collecting that feedback from community like all the way through her mandate, not just at election time. And that's, there's a lot of long, hard, unglamorous work that happened between, let's say, her run in 2014 and her win in 2023 that was about building that base of organizing and building the power that our movement needed for her to win that election. And shout out to Progress Toronto, if they're in the room, who, there you go, who does a tremendous job of that hard work. And if you're not already a donor, I would urge you to consider it. But really working from within the mayor's office to keep people in the tent, to build the relationships and keep the relationships with our allies alive and strong so that they are part of the decision-making, part of executing the vision, and we're not just talking to folks when there's something we need, right? And not just going to them when there's a problem. And so that's a principle that the mayor has obviously brought into office with her, and I think we continue to build and grow that strength, both as we head towards an election, but really all the way through her time in office. So.
Oh, thank you. Okay, we've just enough time for one more question, and so I am going to skip through some of the other ones that we were holding in reserve because I want to talk about the vibes. So AV friends, can you bring up the last pick, please? Okay, so Carla, I'm a Scarborough man's, my mom's Jamaican. I love watching Olivia at Bana. I like seeing her at Pondy Road, but a lot of people, usually people who could not catch the beat if it was tied to a tree in front of them, they want to make having fun seem frivolous and a liability. So talk to us about joy as a leadership tool. Like, how does this help the mayor reach people and get good things done for them?
Yeah, and I mean, at the risk of being repetitive, like this is how the mayor recharges herself. Like this is what drives her every day in community. And I think there's kind of a pushback that we have to have against this idea that being in community and showing up for people where they are is frivolous, right? That it can be made out to be unserious and that you're only governing if you are kind of doing the things that we have traditionally seen like male leaders do, right? Stand behind podiums wearing suits and announce things that they've cooked up in back rooms with the most powerful people in our city. And so I think the culture of the working class and the culture of racialized communities in our city not being considered serious politics is something that this mayor has just never accepted, right? And that's where she wants to spend her time. So she's out at all this stuff all the time, and you know, we get the criticism we get, but sometimes just to troll the haters, when we have Open Doors Toronto, we put all the costumes out, so like when they come through.
I love that. Grace, okay, really quickly, similarly, 1 minute, Zoran is a radical, destructive mastermind, and the next minute he's vapid and unserious. How have you navigated these critiques? What can other progressive leaders learn from a mayor like Zoran, who is so clearly working hard and at the same time still having fun?
Yeah, I mean, people don't want to have a bad time, you know? That's a big strategic point for us. So it really comes from the top down. I'm most experienced at campaigning. I'm getting my governing legs, but speaking from the campaign perspective, a huge principle for us is that canvassing, volunteering, coming to a campaign event has to be fun. It needs to be a good time. So it needs to feel important. One, knocking doors is critical, but two, we really emphasize socials. We really emphasize creativity and people bringing themselves to these events. And that vibe, that ethos is set from the top down. We see Zoran out there having a good time, talking to voters, showing that it's fun to talk to strangers. It's fun to learn about your city through the eyes of your neighbors. And that is so critical to bring into canvassing. That's how you get to a scale where, you know, tens of thousands of people across the city are knocking doors. And sure, you sacrifice some control for that sort of scale, but I think it's okay to sacrifice control for scale and for joy. That's what makes a movement sustainable and what makes it grow. I know I'm angry, I'm sure many of you are, but we can't be angry only. So we have to have fun too. That'll bring more people in, that will enable us not to burn ourselves or burn others out. And I think having leaders like Mayor Chow and Mayor Mamdani who set that example, who show that it's fun to be among the people, it's fun to embed yourself in working class culture and cultures across incredibly diverse cities, set an example for the rest of us that we need to, fighting for our city means being part of it. And that's really important to hold close to our hearts.
Right on. Well, I can't think of a better note to end on than that. So I'll just say, you know, I've had so much fun chopping it up with the both of you. Thank you so much for your work on behalf of working people in Toronto and in New York, and for joining us today. And thank you all for being a part of this conversation.
Thank you so much. What an energizing panel to wrap up our summit with. So I'm sorry to have to be the one to say it, but we have reached the end of the 2026 Progress Summit. Yeah, it sucks.
Shame!
I have had such an incredible time spending the last few days with all of you and my incredible co-MC, Jared. Summits like these are such an important reminder that even in difficult moments, and especially in difficult moments like these, we are not alone. We are a movement, we are a community, and when we come together, we make each other stronger.
This year, we are especially grateful you joined us in the middle of an intense election cycle with so much at stake. Your presence here, your voice, your ideas, they matter more than ever. Over the last few days, we were reminded what it means to defend democracy across our borders, be that in our politics, our media, our workplaces, our classrooms, and we did more than just talk. We built strategy, and we took action that will follow us as we leave this place. So now, to help us close out this powerful gathering, please join me in welcoming back the Executive Director of the Broadbent Institute, Jen Hassam.
This is one of the best parts of the summit every year, the degree to which I've lost my voice. I'd like to blame everyone who selected such incredible songs last night at karaoke that I just had to be singing along in the crowd. So I just want to take a couple moments to, before we all just scatter back to the airports, train stations, our cars, you know, walk across the street for any locals in Ottawa, just to acknowledge everybody who helped make the summit possible. First, of course, to our speakers and our special guests who joined us from, of course, across Canada, but also Ecuador, the United States, Mexico, Germany, and beyond. And every single attendee this year who traveled near and far, thank you. You made a choice. You crossed provinces, borders, and I really hope that you really felt the full impact of bringing yourself and the choice to participate this year. I want to thank everyone who helped sponsor the summit, especially our platinum sponsors, CUPE, the Canadian Medical Association, UFCW, the United Steelworkers, and of course our incredible title sponsors, the Canadian Labour Congress and Action Network. Your support makes this possible because no billionaires are lining up for us to be able to convene and talk to each other and work together and learn from one another like we did over the course of these past few days. To our volunteers, those are the volunteers, those are some of the first faces you saw when you came to the election, to the summit. See, it's been a long one. You are the ones who are at the registration desk. You are the ones who were helping people find seats. You are the ones who are greeting people in the hallway and directing the pedestrian traffic in this hotel. Thank you so much. You're the reason why the conference feels so seamless. And we are also deeply grateful. A big shout out to Heather and Galia, our accessibility coordinators. Thank you for making sure that this was an accessible space. Let's not forget our MCs, Jared and Balan. They've been carrying us through the whole program. And they did such a wonderful job of just keeping things moving along diligently, politely, funny. And last but not least, the small but mighty Broadbent Institute staff. Oh, thanks, Sean. We've been working for months and months to put this on, and it is no detail and has gone really unthought, from the programming to the food to the speakers, all these partnerships, and anything we can do to help facilitate people gathering and speaking to one another. So, as we mark 15 years of the Broadbent Institute in existence, Can you imagine that? 15 years. I have been reflecting a lot about Ed and Ed's legacy. And for democracy to exist, he never believed that it was just about elections. It was about dignity. It was about sharing power and building power, especially by ordinary people, regular working people coming together, having a real say in how decisions are made, not letting it be guided by the invisible hand or corporate control. And that is how we can build a good economy and a good society, is by leveraging our democratic power, taking it back, and having that say. And this vision runs through everything that we've done at the summit. Because let's be clear, the forces that are aligned against us, they are organized. They are very well funded, and they coordinate across borders. And so that's why we have to do the same. Folks, change, it's a tough job, but I know that we can do it by building a big tent like we have. No more nitpicking, no more gatekeeping, no more conformity to the 100 big things that we all believe in together, but to anchor it in humanity first, hearing each other, finding commonalities, respecting differences and different approaches, and doing what we can to work together to make change happen. Because we are not isolated actors fighting in separate battles. We are a network. We're part of something larger. And when we find those commonalities and we merge together, it's inspiring and we can do it. Alors, en quittant ce sommet, je vous invite à emporter avec vous non seulement les cartes professionnelles que tu as collectionnées durant le sommet, mais aussi les idées et le sentiment d'une profonde solidarité envers les uns et les autres. So I asked you on day one, make new friends. I certainly have. There's a lot of new attendees this year. I hope you have too. So let's have this summit and even this closing part not be an end, but a launching pad for what comes next. Merci bien tout le monde. Thank you everybody for joining us. I'll see you next year.